What if Naruto was secretly the reincarnation of One Piece's fleet admiral Sengoku? I'm talking about the Buddha himself, the tactical genius who commanded entire fleets, could sense people's emotions from miles away, and literally transformed into a golden giant that traded blows with Whitebeard. Now imagine all that ancient wisdom and those absolutely broken abilities slowly awakening in our favorite knucklehead ninja. Picture this. Naruto starts having these weird dreams, develops insane battlefield awareness overnight, and can suddenly manifest golden chakra constructs that make even the Sannin think twice. But here's the kicker, he's not doing it alone. Ino becomes his strategic partner, and together they revolutionize how the ninja world thinks about warfare, leadership, and connection itself. This isn't just another power-up story. These two literally rewrite the playbook on everything from village defense to handling world-ending threats. The way they deal with pain, chef's kiss, how they coordinate the allied forces, game-changing. Smash that like if you're ready for some tactical brilliance mixed with romance that actually works, and let's jump into this epic tale. The morning mist clung to the mountain peaks like a guilty secret, and Naruto Uzumaki was getting really tired of running through it every damn day. 3 months of training with the pervy sage, and his legs still felt like jelly after their light morning warm-up that involved sprinting up near-vertical cliff faces while dodging whatever creative torture Jiraiya had dreamed up overnight. "Oi brat, you're falling behind," Jiraiya's voice echoed from somewhere ahead, annoyingly cheerful for someone who'd been drinking sake until well past midnight. "I'm not falling behind, you're just showing off," Naruto called back, though he had to admit his lungs were burning. The thin mountain air wasn't doing him any favors, and the weighted training gear Jiraiya had insisted on felt like it was made of solid iron. When they finally stopped at a small clearing overlooking a valley village, Naruto collapsed dramatically onto the nearest boulder. "I'm dying, Iro Sennin, this is it. Tell Sakura-chan I died bravely." "Drama queen." Jiraiya settled beside him with considerably less theatrics, though Naruto noticed he was breathing harder than usual too. "But you're getting stronger, I can see it in how you move now." Naruto perked up at the rare compliment, grinning widely. "Really? I mean, of course I am. I'm gonna be Hokage after all. Tebayo." The familiar declaration hung in the air between them, but something felt different about it today. Maybe it was the way the morning light hit the village below, peaceful and quiet, or maybe it was just the weird mood he'd been in lately. Everything felt bigger somehow, more complicated. "Speaking of home," Jiraiya said, pulling out a scroll from his jacket, "message from Konoha arrived this morning." Naruto practically lunged for it, nearly tumbling off his boulder in the process. Letters from home were rare during their training journey, and he devoured each one like it was Ikaraku ramen. His eyes scanned the neat handwriting quickly, definitely from the Hokage's office, probably written by one of those efficient chunin who always seem to have perfect penmanship. Team 10 successfully completed a rank mission to Land of Waves. Minimal casualties. Exemplary tactical coordination by field leader Yamanaka. Naruto's voice trailed off as he read. "Something interesting?" Jiraiya asked, though there was something knowing in his tone that made Naruto suspicious. "Ino led an A-rank mission." Naruto looked up from the scroll, genuinely surprised. "I mean, she's smart and all, but wow, that's really something." He found himself thinking about the last time he'd seen her, right before leaving with Jiraiya. She'd looked different somehow, more serious, more focused. Not that she hadn't been serious before, but there was something in her eyes that reminded him of how Shikamaru looked when he was really thinking hard about something important. "People change when you're not watching, brat." Jiraiya was studying him with those sharp eyes that saw way too much, especially when they've got something to prove. "Yeah," Naruto folded the scroll carefully, tucking it into his jacket. "Yeah, I guess they do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the village below start to wake up. Smoke began rising from chimneys, and Naruto could just make out tiny figures moving through the streets. "It looks so peaceful from up here, so simple." "Iro Sennin," he said eventually, "do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing? I mean, not the training and stuff, but everything else. The way the ninja world works." Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. "That's a pretty heavy question for breakfast conversation." "I know, but..." Naruto struggled to put the feeling into words. "Sometimes I think about all the missions I've been on, all the people I've fought, and I wonder if there was a better way. Like, maybe if someone had just talked to them first, or tried to understand why they were doing whatever bad thing they were doing. And sometimes people are just bad, Naruto. Sometimes talking doesn't work. But how do we know until we try?" Before Jiraiya could answer, a commotion erupted from the village below. Even from this distance, they could see people running, hear faint shouts carried on the wind. Naruto was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the kunai pouch at his hip. Bandits, Jiraiya said grimly, already forming hand seals. Been having trouble with them in this region lately. Come on, brat. Time for some practical application. They moved down the mountain with practiced efficiency, Naruto's earlier exhaustion forgotten in the face of people who needed help. The village was in chaos when they arrived. Market stalls overturned, people huddled in their homes, and a group of rough-looking men systematically looting anything of value they could carry. There, Naruto pointed to where a particularly large bandit was threatening an elderly shopkeeper. "Let's wait," Jiraiya caught his arm. "Look closer." Naruto paused, really looking at the scene instead of just reacting to it. The bandits were taking food and medicine primarily, not gold or jewelry. Their clothes were patched and worn, not the gear of professional criminals. And when one of them knocked over a display of toys, he actually stopped to help the shopkeeper's daughter pick them up, looking genuinely sorry. "They don't look like regular bandits," Naruto said slowly. "No, they don't. What do you think we should do about it?" It was clearly a test, but Naruto found himself actually wanting to think it through instead of just charging in. Something about the whole situation felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with the obvious crime being committed. He was so focused on trying to work out the puzzle that he almost missed the moment when everything changed. The leader of the bandits, a thin man with desperate eyes, was arguing with someone who looked like the village headman. Naruto caught fragments of their conversation as he crept closer. "My daughter, fever won't break. Medicine costs," and then the headman's cold response, "Not our problem, pay like everyone else." That's when it hit him, not the understanding but something else entirely. Something that felt like a memory that wasn't his own. A burning library, scholars screaming. A man in a Buddha mask weighing the lives of knowledge against the lives of people, and choosing. Naruto stumbled, his head suddenly pounding. The vision, if that's what it was, lasted only a second, but it felt like he'd lived through years of someone else's life. Someone who'd faced impossible choices and carried the weight of them like stones in his chest. Justice isn't about following rules, a voice that wasn't his own seemed to whisper in his mind. It's about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. "Kid, you okay?" One of the bandits had noticed him lurking behind the market stall, but instead of attacking, the man looked genuinely concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Naruto shook his head, trying to clear it. The strange vision was already fading, but something had changed. When he looked at the situation now, he saw it differently. Not just bandits and victims, but desperate people making impossible choices because the system had failed them. "Your daughter," Naruto said, somehow knowing he was right. "She's sick, isn't she? And the medicine costs more than you can afford." The bandit leader jerked like he'd been slapped. "How did you? And you?" Naruto turned to the headman, pieces clicking together in his mind with an almost supernatural clarity. "You're charging triple the normal price for basic medicine because you know people will pay anything to save their kids." The headman's face went red. "Those are fair market prices. I have a business to run." "Fair." The word came out harder than Naruto intended, carrying an edge he didn't recognize in his own voice. "Fair is when a child doesn't die because her father can't afford medicine that costs pennies to make." He could feel Jiraiya watching him from the shadows, probably wondering where this sudden analytical streak was coming from. Honestly, Naruto was wondering the same thing. It was like someone had turned on a light in his brain, illuminating connections and motivations he'd never been able to see before. "Look," he said, addressing both groups, "this isn't how it has to be." "Easy for you to say, kid," the bandit leader spat. "You're not watching your little girl burn up with fever while some merchant gets rich off her suffering." "You're right." "I'm not," Naruto stepped forward, hands visible and empty. "But I know what it's like to be desperate, to feel like the whole world's against you and nobody cares if you live or die." Something in his tone must have reached them, because both the bandits and the villagers were listening now instead of just shouting at each other. But here's the thing, stealing isn't going to fix anything. It just makes everyone hurt. And hoarding medicine when people are dying, that's not business, that's murder with extra steps. Naruto looked between them, that strange new clarity still humming in his mind. "There's a third option here, one where nobody has to be the bad guy." "Which is?" the headman demanded. "You sell the medicine at cost, not triple markup, not even double. Just enough to cover what you paid for it." Naruto's voice carried an authority that surprised even him. "And you," he turned to the bandits, "help rebuild what you damaged today. Work off the debt honestly." "And why would either of us agree to that?" the headman sneered. Naruto smiled, but there was something sharp in it now. Because if you don't, I'm going to make sure everyone in the next 3 villages knows exactly what kind of person you are. How you got rich off sick children while their parents went hungry trying to pay your prices. The threat was delivered quietly, almost casually, but there was steel behind it that made the headman take a step back. And if we refuse, the bandit leader asked, then I stop you the hard way and your daughter still doesn't get her medicine. Naruto's expression softened. But it doesn't have to be like that. You're not bad people. You're just people who have been pushed too far by a system that doesn't care about you. The silence stretched long enough for Naruto to wonder if he'd completely misjudged the situation. Then, slowly, the bandit leader nodded. All right, kid, we'll try it your way. It took another hour to work out all the details, and by the end of it, Naruto felt like he'd run up 3 more mountains. But they'd managed it. The medicine went to the families who needed it. The bandits agreed to stay and help repair the damage, and the headman, well, he wasn't happy about it, but he wasn't in a position to argue. As they walked back up the mountain trail, Jiraiya was unusually quiet. So, Naruto said finally, how'd I do, Iro-Sennin? Honestly, I'm not sure. Jiraiya glanced at him sideways. That was some pretty sophisticated thinking back there. Reminded me of how Minato used to approach problems, seeing all the angles, finding solutions nobody else thought of. Naruto felt a familiar warm glow at the comparison to his father, but underneath it was something else. A nagging sense that the clarity he'd felt, the way he'd been able to read the situation so clearly, that hadn't felt entirely like him. Can I ask you something weird? He said. Shoot, do you think it's possible to remember things that never happened to you? Jiraiya stopped walking. What kind of things? I don't know, just feelings, I guess. Like when I was figuring out what was really going on down there, it felt like I'd been in that kind of situation before. But I haven't. At least I don't think I have. Jiraiya resumed walking, but Naruto could practically hear him thinking. Could be a lot of things. Growth, intuition, or maybe you're just finally starting to use that brain of yours for something besides ramen and pranks. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Naruto muttered, but he was smiling. Still, as they climbed higher into the mountains, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. Something that went beyond just resolving a conflict between bandits and villagers. That night, as he stared up at the stars from his sleeping bag, he found himself thinking about Ino again. The letter had mentioned her tactical coordination, and he wondered what kind of impossible situations she'd faced. Whether she'd had to make the kind of hard choices that left you questioning everything you thought you knew about right and wrong. Justice isn't about following rules, that strange voice whispered in his memory. It's about doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. Naruto rolled over, pulling his blanket up to his chin. Tomorrow he'd ask Jiraiya more about those weird flashes of whatever they were. Tonight, he just wanted to sleep and dream about simpler times. But even as he drifted off, he couldn't quite shake the image of a man in a Buddha mask, standing over the ashes of what might have been wisdom or might have been tragedy, and wondering if he'd made the right choice. In the end, Naruto supposed, that was all any of them could do. 2 weeks had passed since the incident with the bandits, and Naruto was starting to think he'd imagined the whole weird vision thing. Sure, he'd been having strange dreams, flashes of unfamiliar faces and places that felt more like memories than his imagination. But dreams were just dreams, right? Even if they left him waking up with his head full of tactical formations, he'd never learned and leadership principles that sounded way too sophisticated to come from his own brain. You're overthinking again, Jiraiya observed from across their campfire, not looking up from the scroll he was reading. I can practically hear the gears grinding from here. I don't overthink, Naruto protested, then paused. Okay, maybe I've been thinking more lately, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You're always saying I should use my brain more. True, but there's a difference between thinking and tying yourself in mental knots. Jiraiya finally looked up, fixing him with that penetrating stare that made Naruto feel like his sensei could see right through his skull. What's really bothering you, brat? Naruto poked at the fire with a stick, watching sparks dance up toward the stars. How was he supposed to explain that sometimes when he closed his eyes, he could see battlefield layouts as clearly as if he were looking down from above? That yesterday, while they'd been sparring, he'd suddenly known exactly how to counter a technique he'd never seen before. It's probably nothing, he said finally. Just weird dreams. Aha! Jiraiya didn't sound convinced, but he didn't push it either. Instead, he rolled up his scroll and stretched. Well, whatever's going on in that thick skull of yours, you'll have to figure it out on the job. We're making a detour tomorrow. What kind of detour? The kind where I leave you in charge of protecting an entire town while I chase down a lead that could be vital to our mission. Jiraiya's expression turned serious. Intel suggests Akatsuki activity in the area, nothing concrete but enough to worry me. The local authorities requested help, and since I need to investigate some ruins about 50 miles north. You're leaving me alone, Naruto tried not to sound as nervous as he felt. I mean, not that I can't handle it, it's just a whole town. Relax, it's not like you'll be facing down the entire organization single-handed, probably just reconnaissance, maybe a small strike team if we're unlucky. Jiraiya grinned, but there was something calculating in his eyes. Besides, you need the experience. Can't become Hokage if you've never been responsible for anyone but yourself. The word responsible hit Naruto like a physical weight. Suddenly, he was thinking about all the people in that peaceful village they'd helped 2 weeks ago, imagining them under attack with no one but him standing between them and disaster. How many people? He asked quietly. About 3,000, small trading hub, mostly civilians with a handful of retired ninja and maybe a dozen active-duty chunin. Jiraiya was watching him carefully now. You scared? Terrified, Naruto admitted. But that's normal, right? Being scared when people are counting on you. Kid, if you weren't scared, I'd be worried about your sanity. Jiraiya reached over and ruffled his hair. Fear keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being afraid for other people that you become dangerous in all the wrong ways. That night, Naruto dreamed of a massive white structure rising from the ocean, its courtyards filled with thousands of uniformed figures moving in perfect coordination. He stood at the highest balcony, looking down at the organized chaos below, and somehow he understood every piece of it. The patrol rotations, the supply lines, the contingency plans layered on top of contingency plans. A good commander sees the whole board, a voice that sounded like his own but older, wearier, explained. Every piece, every possible move, every way things can go wrong. The moment you focus on just one part of the battle, you've already lost. When he woke, golden light was filtering through the trees, and his head was buzzing with concepts he shouldn't have known. Unit cohesion, force multiplication, strategic depth. Terms that felt as familiar as ramen and tebayo, even though he was pretty sure he'd never heard them before in his life. Morning, sunshine, Jiraiya called from where he was packing his gear. Ready for your first command, as ready as I'll ever be, I guess. Naruto rolled out of his sleeping bag, stretching muscles that felt oddly tense. Any last-minute advice? Don't get anyone killed, don't let anyone get killed, and try not to level the town in the process. Jiraiya paused in his packing. Oh, and Naruto, trust your instincts. They've been getting sharper lately. An hour later, Naruto stood at the gates of Yukimura, watching Jiraiya disappear into the northern hills. The town spread out before him like something from his dream, not the white fortress, but he could see it with the same tactical clarity. Main roads, defensible positions, sight lines, choke points where a small force could hold off a larger one. The local commander, a grizzled chunin named Hayashi, didn't look particularly confident in his temporary replacement. No offense, kid, but you look about 12 years old, Hayashi said, though his tone was more resigned than hostile. And Jiraiya-sama said you're still a genin? Technically, yeah, Naruto scratched the back of his head, but I've been on a lot of missions, fought some pretty tough opponents, and I've been having some new ideas about strategy lately. New ideas, Hayashi raised an eyebrow, such as, that's when the words started flowing out of Naruto's mouth like water from a broken dam. He found himself sketching patrol routes in the dirt with a stick, explaining overlapping fields of observation, discussing the importance of maintaining reserve forces and communication lines. Hayashi's expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to something that might have been respect. Where did you learn all this? The older ninja asked when Naruto finally ran out of tactical theory. Naruto stared down at the complex diagram he'd drawn without really thinking about it. I honestly don't know, it just makes sense, I guess. Well, it's better than anything we had planned. Hayashi stood up, brushing dirt off his knees. All right, kid, let's see if your theories work in practice. They spent the morning reorganizing the town's defenses according to Naruto's suggestions. It was strange. He'd never commanded anyone before, but somehow he knew exactly how to position the scouts, where to place the defensive barriers, how to coordinate the civilian evacuation routes. The local ninja followed his orders with increasing confidence as they saw how everything fit together into a coherent whole. It's like he can see the entire battlefield at once, he heard one of the chunin whisper to another. Even things that aren't there yet. That should have been a compliment, but something about it made Naruto's stomach twist. The voice from his dreams echoed in his mind. A good commander sees the whole board. But what if seeing the whole board meant seeing people as just pieces to be moved around? What if thinking strategically meant thinking of acceptable losses? He was still wrestling with that uncomfortable thought when the attack came. It started with a scout's emergency flare from the eastern perimeter, 3 quick bursts of red light that meant large force approaching. Naruto felt something click in his mind, like tumblers falling into place in a lock, and suddenly he could picture the entire situation with crystal clarity. Diversionary force, he said with absolute certainty, though he wasn't sure how he knew. They want us looking east while the real attack comes from. He paused, closing his eyes and reaching out with senses he didn't remember developing. There, a wrongness in the air, the subtle displacement of natural sounds. South, 12 ninja, maybe more. They'll hit the market district in about 4 minutes. Heihachi stared at him. How could you possibly know? No time. Naruto was already moving, his hands flying through signals that felt more familiar than they should have. Redirect Team 3 to the south wall, have Team 1 swing around behind them for a pincer movement, and get all civilians into the central plaza. Now, the next few minutes were a blur of motion and coordination that felt like the most natural thing in the world. Naruto found himself everywhere at once, directing traffic, coordinating attacks, somehow always knowing exactly where he was needed most. It was like he had eyes in the back of his head, like he could sense the flow of battle the way he might sense chakra. The enemy ninja were good, professional, coordinated, clearly experienced. But they were also expecting to face a standard small-town defense, not the kind of tactical coordination usually seen in major military operations. Naruto's forces hit them from 3 directions at once, herding them into a carefully prepared kill zone where superior numbers and positioning negated their individual skill advantages. It should have been over quickly and cleanly. But then one of the enemy ninja, a tall man with scars crisscrossing his face, broke free from the trap and made a beeline for a group of civilians who hadn't made it to safety in time. Naruto saw it happening like it was in slow motion, the ninja's blade gleaming in the afternoon sun. The family frozen in terror, mother, father, 2 small children who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. His own people too far away to intercept in time. Acceptable losses, whispered a voice in his head that sounded like cold calculation. You can't save everyone. Focus on the bigger picture. No, Naruto snarled, and something inside him erupted. Golden light blazed around him like a miniature sun, and suddenly he wasn't just seeing the battlefield. He was feeling it, every heartbeat and breath and terrified thought within a 100-yard radius. The world slowed to a crawl as he moved, his body somehow lighter and faster than it had ever been before. He reached the scarred ninja just as the man's blade began its downward arc toward the children. Naruto's fist connected with something that felt like hitting solid steel. But the golden energy around him blazed brighter, and the enemy ninja went flying backward to crash into a stone wall hard enough to leave cracks in the masonry. For just a moment, Naruto felt like he was somewhere else entirely, standing on a platform above churning ocean waves, facing down enemies who commanded the very forces of nature, protecting people who looked to him as their absolute last hope against the darkness. Then the golden light faded, and he was just Naruto again, standing over an unconscious enemy ninja, while 4 civilians stared at him with expressions somewhere between awe and terror. "Are you okay?" he asked the family, and his voice came out hoarse like he'd been screaming. "Nobody hurt," the mother just nodded mutely, clutching her children closer. The father managed a shaky, "thank you," before they hurried away toward the safety of the central plaza. Naruto looked around the battlefield and realized it was over. The enemy force was either unconscious or fled, his people were securing the area, and somehow, miraculously, there were no friendly casualties. Not even serious injuries. "Well," Heihachi said as he approached, looking slightly stunned. "That was weird," Naruto finished for him. "That was really weird. I was going to say incredible, but weird works too." The older ninja studied him with new eyes. "That light show at the end, what was that?" "I have no idea." Naruto slumped against a nearby wall, suddenly exhausted. "It just happened like everything else today." "Sir," one of the Chunin approached hesitantly. "We found something you should see." They followed him to where the enemy's gear had been collected. Most of it was standard ninja equipment, but there were a few items that made Naruto's blood run cold. Forehead protectors with the symbols scratched out, maps marking population centers, and a scroll with coordinates that he somehow knew corresponded to orphanages and schools. They weren't after the town, he said quietly. They were after the people, the civilians. Slavers, Hayashi suggested, but his tone suggested he didn't really believe it. Worse, Naruto's hands clenched into fists. They were shopping. Testing our defenses, seeing how many people they could snatch before we could stop them. The implications hit him like a physical blow. If he hadn't been here, if he hadn't reorganized the defenses, if he hadn't somehow known exactly how to counter their tactics, dozens of families would have been dragged off to whatever horrible fate these people had planned. But that raised an even more unsettling question. How had he known? Where had all that tactical knowledge come from? And what was that golden energy that had made him feel like someone else entirely? That evening, after the cleanup was finished and Jiraiya had returned with news of his own, no Akatsuki activity in the ruins, but signs they'd been there recently, Naruto found himself staring at another letter from Konoha. This one mentioned Ino again, something about her successfully coordinating a joint mission between 3 different teams, displaying exceptional leadership abilities and tactical acumen. "She's really grown strong, hasn't she?" he murmured, surprising himself with how proud he felt. It was like watching a flower bloom, seeing someone he'd known since childhood becoming the person they were always meant to be. Who? The Yamanaka girl? Jiraiya looked up from his own correspondence. According to this report, she's being considered for early promotion to Special Jounin, youngest candidate in a decade. Good for her. And Naruto meant it, even though something about the whole situation made his chest feel tight in a way he couldn't quite identify. "She deserves it. Funny thing," Jiraiya said casually, the report mentions her tactical style. Apparently she has an unusual ability to coordinate multiple units simultaneously, like she can see the whole battlefield at once. Naruto went very still. "What did you say? Just that her commanding officers are impressed by?" Jiraiya stopped, his eyes sharpening. "Naruto, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." A good commander sees the whole board. "It's nothing," Naruto said quickly, but his mind was racing. First him developing impossible tactical instincts overnight, now Ino displaying similar abilities. That couldn't be coincidence, could it? But before he could pursue that thought further, exhaustion hit him like a tidal wave. The golden energy surge from earlier had apparently come with a cost, and his body was finally demanding payment. "I think I need to sleep," he mumbled, already rolling out his sleeping bag. "Good idea. Tomorrow we start working on figuring out what the hell that light show was." Jiraiya's voice carried a note of concern. "Because whatever's happening to you, kid, it's bigger than just getting stronger. Powers like that don't just appear out of nowhere." As Naruto drifted off to sleep, his last conscious thought was wondering if Ino was somewhere out there, staring at the same stars and wrestling with the same questions about changes she couldn't explain. In his dreams, he stood again on that high platform above the churning sea, but this time he wasn't alone. A figure stood beside him, not clear enough to make out details, but somehow familiar. A presence that felt like partnership, like someone who could understand the weight of command and the price of making impossible choices. "You're not meant to carry this burden alone," the figure seemed to say. "None of us are." When he woke the next morning, golden light was filtering through the trees again, but this time it felt less like sunrise and more like a promise. The dreams were getting worse. Naruto stared at the ceiling of their small inn room, watching shadows dance across the wooden beams as dawn crept through the window. He'd been awake for hours now, afraid to close his eyes and risk falling back into visions that felt more real than his own memories. Last night it had been a conversation between 2 old men, one with a dog-shaped hat and kind eyes, the other massive and scarred, sitting across from each other in what might have been friendship or might have been a declaration of war. "You've changed, Sengoku," the scarred man had said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. "Time was you'd have come at me with everything you had instead of talking. Maybe I finally learned something, Whitebeard. Maybe we both did. The memory, because that's what it was, wasn't it? Not a dream, but someone else's actual memory, carried emotional weight that made Naruto's chest tight. Regret, respect. The kind of complicated relationship that could only exist between people who'd spent years as enemies and somehow become something more. "Oi, brat, you planning to stare holes in the ceiling all morning, or are we actually going to train today?" Naruto rolled over to find Jiraiya already dressed and ready, that knowing look in his eyes again. His sensei had been watching him more carefully since the incident at Yukimura 3 days ago, and Naruto was getting tired of feeling like a particularly interesting bug under a magnifying glass. "Just thinking," Naruto mumbled, dragging himself out of bed. "About what? Stuff, people, weather. Naruto paused, trying to figure out how to voice the question that had been eating at him. Iro-senin, do you think it's possible to care about someone you've never actually met? Jiraiya's eyebrows went up. That's oddly philosophical for this early in the morning. You talking about a girl? No, I mean maybe. I don't know. Naruto ran his hands through his hair in frustration. It's complicated. Most things worth thinking about are. Jiraiya settled into the chair by the window, giving Naruto his full attention. In that way, that meant he was taking this seriously. Want to talk about it? Naruto considered it. How could he explain that sometimes when he closed his eyes, he could feel the weight of friendships that had lasted decades, rivalries that had shaped entire eras, bonds forged in battle and tempered by time? That he found himself missing people he'd never met and mourning losses that weren't his own. Have you ever felt responsible for someone you barely know? He asked instead. Every day. Jiraiya's answer was immediate and certain. Every person in Konoha, every ally village, hell, every innocent civilian I've ever encountered. That's what it means to have power, Naruto. The responsibility extends beyond just the people you're close to. But what if it's more than that? What if you feel like you've let them down somehow, even though you've never even spoken to them? Jiraiya was quiet for a long moment, studying Naruto's face. This have anything to do with those weird dreams you mentioned? Maybe. Naruto slumped back onto the bed. I keep seeing things, Iro-senin, people and places that feel familiar even though I know I've never been there. And the worst part is they feel important, like they matter more than anything else in the world, but I don't even know why. Before Jiraiya could respond, there was a knock at their door. The innkeeper's voice called through the wood. Jiraiya-sama, messenger here with urgent correspondence. The letter that followed changed everything. Naruto watched his sensei's expression grow increasingly grim as he read, until finally Jiraiya set the scroll aside with a heavy sigh. We're going back, he said simply. Back where? Konoha tomorrow. Jiraiya was already starting to pack their gear. There's been developments, things I need to discuss with the Hokage in person. What kind of developments? Naruto felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Is everyone okay, Sakura-chan, Kakashi-sense? Everyone's fine, Jiraiya assured him quickly. It's not that kind of emergency, more political, strategic. He paused in his packing. Actually, you might find some of it interesting. Apparently, several of your former classmates have been showing unusual aptitude for leadership roles lately. Very unusual. The chill got worse. Unusual how? Tactical thinking beyond their training. Coordination abilities that typically take years to develop. Strategic insights that. Jiraiya trailed off, looking at Naruto with those sharp eyes again. That remind me a lot of what you displayed at Yukimura. They spent the rest of the day traveling, covering ground at a pace that would have killed Naruto a few months ago, but now felt almost leisurely. His endurance had improved dramatically during their training. But more than that, he found himself automatically calculating rest stops, optimal routes, even potential ambush points along the way. It was like having a tactical computer running in the background of his mind, constantly analyzing and planning. As they stopped for the night in a small clearing, Naruto found himself really focusing on that background process for the first time. It was subtle, so subtle he probably wouldn't have noticed if he hadn't been looking for it, but it was definitely there. A constant low-level awareness of his surroundings that went beyond his normal senses. Hey, Iro-senin, he said as they set up camp. You know how some really experienced ninja can just feel when they're being watched, like they have eyes in the back of their heads? Sure. Takes years to develop that kind of spatial awareness, though. Why? What if someone developed it really fast, like overnight? Jiraiya paused in laying out his sleeping role. I'd say either they're a prodigy beyond anything I've ever seen, or something very unusual is happening to them. His voice carried a weight that made Naruto's stomach twist. Naruto, exactly how much of your recent growth feels natural to you? The honest answer was none of it. The tactical thinking, the enhanced awareness, even the golden energy that had saved those civilians, it all felt like putting on someone else's clothes. They fit, sort of, but they weren't really his. I don't know, he said instead. Maybe I'm just finally growing up. Maybe. But Jiraiya didn't sound convinced. That night, the dreams came stronger than ever before. This time, he wasn't just watching someone else's memories, he was living them. He was the man in the Buddha mask, standing in a vast office overlooking a harbor full of warships. Reports covered his desk, each one representing thousands of lives under his command, and the weight of their trust was like a physical thing pressing down on his shoulders. A knock at the door. An aide with news of another defeat, another friend lost to the endless war, and somehow, impossibly, the strength to keep going anyway. Sir, the families are asking about funeral arrangements. Tell them we'll honor every life lost. Not just the officers, every single person who stood between chaos and innocent people. They earned that much. The aide hesitated. Sir, there are a lot of families. The cost will be paid. Whatever it costs. A pause, looking out at the harbor where ships flew flags at half-mast. They trusted us to lead them. The least we can do is remember them properly. Naruto woke with tears on his face and an ache in his chest that felt like it might never heal. The emotional weight of the memory was staggering, not just the grief, but the responsibility. The understanding that every decision, every strategy, every moment of hesitation or action had consequences measured in human lives. But underneath the pain was something else. A deep, abiding sense of purpose. The knowledge that someone had to stand between the innocent and the darkness, no matter what it cost them personally. That's what it means, he whispered to the pre-dawn darkness. That's what it means to be a leader. When they reached Konoha the next evening, Naruto was surprised by how much the familiar sights of home affected him. The gate guards, the bustling streets, even the smell of Ikaraku ramen, everything felt both exactly the same and somehow different, like he was seeing it all through new eyes. More unsettling was the way people looked at him. Word of what had happened at Yukimura had apparently preceded them, because he caught Chunin and Jounin studying him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to something that might have been concern. Go get settled, Jiraiya told him as they approached his apartment. I need to report to the Hokage. We'll debrief properly tomorrow. Naruto nodded, but as his sensei walked away, he found his feet carrying him in a different direction entirely. Through the village center, past the training grounds, toward the Yamanaka flower shop where warm light spilled out onto the evening street. He told himself he was just being friendly, just checking in on an old classmate after being away for months. It had nothing to do with the strange sense of connection he'd felt reading about her recent missions, or the way her name kept coming up in conversations about unusual leadership abilities. The shop was closed, but he could see movement in the apartment above it. Before he could second-guess himself, he was knocking on the door. Just a minute, Ino's voice called from inside, and then footsteps on the stairs. The door opened to reveal her in casual clothes, blonde hair loose around her shoulders, and an expression of genuine surprise. Naruto, when did you get back? About an hour ago. He scratched the back of his head, suddenly feeling awkward. I was just in the neighborhood, thought I'd say hi. Well, come in then. She stepped aside to let him pass, and he noticed how she moved now more confident, more aware of her surroundings, like she was constantly ready for anything. T, you look like you could use it. That obvious, huh? You look like you haven't slept in a week. She busied herself with the tea kettle, but he could feel her watching him out of the corner of her eye. Training with Jiraiya-sama must be intense. You could say that. Naruto settled into a chair at her small kitchen table, and for a moment they just looked at each other. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt like they were both trying to figure out how much to say, how much the other person might understand. You're different, Ino said finally. So are you. I know, it's been… She paused, searching for the right words. Strange, like waking up one day and finding out you're taller, except it's not physical. It's in here. She tapped her temple. Suddenly, I can see patterns in things I never noticed before. Coordinate people in ways that shouldn't be possible. It's like someone switched on a light in my brain. Naruto's heart started beating faster. When did it start? About 2 months ago. Right around the time we got word that you and Jiraiya-sama had handled that bandit situation up north. She set the tea kettle on the stove and turned to face him fully. What about you? When did you start seeing the battlefield like a chessboard? He stared at her. How did you know? Because you're doing it right now. Her voice was gentle but certain. You walked into my apartment and automatically cataloged exit routes, defensive positions, and sight lines. You're sitting where you can see both the door and the window, and you've positioned yourself so you could reach either one in 2 steps maximum. Naruto looked around and realized she was absolutely right. He'd done all of that without even thinking about it, the same way he might breathe or blink. This is really freaking me out, he admitted. Join the club. Ino sat down across from him, and there was something in her eyes that looked like relief. I was starting to think I was going crazy, but if it's happening to you too, then either we're both going crazy or something else is going on. Naruto met her gaze directly. Ino, have you been having strange dreams? Memories that don't feel like your own? The tea kettle whistled, but neither of them moved to answer it. Ino's face had gone very still, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. A woman with purple hair and kind eyes. She's standing in a field of flowers, but she's wearing armor and there's blood on her hands. Ino's eyes were distant, like she was seeing something far away. She's apologizing to someone I can't see, saying she's sorry she couldn't save them all. And I wake up crying every time because I can feel how much she cared, how badly she wanted to protect everyone, and how it nearly destroyed her when she couldn't. Naruto felt like the world had tilted sideways. That's exactly what it's like for me. Except it's a man in a white coat, making impossible decisions and carrying the weight of them like stones. They stared at each other across the small kitchen table while the tea kettle continued its shrill whistle, and Naruto felt something click into place in his mind. Not a memory this time, but a recognition, like looking in a mirror and finally understanding what you were seeing. "We're not going crazy," he said with sudden certainty. "No," Ino agreed, reaching out to turn off the kettle. "But I think we might be something else entirely." She poured the tea with steady hands, but Naruto could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she held herself like she was expecting an attack at any moment. The same hypervigilance that had become second nature to him over the past few weeks. "Ino," he said quietly, "do you ever feel like you're remembering people you've never met but somehow care about more than anything? Every day." She set a cup in front of him and wrapped her hands around her own, as if seeking warmth. "There's this sense of loss, I guess, like there are people I should be protecting, should be fighting alongside, but they're just out of reach. And responsibility," Naruto added. "Like there are things I should be doing, people counting on me in ways I don't understand." "Yes," her voice carried the weight of shared understanding, "exactly like that." They drank their tea in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now. The silence of people who had found someone else who understood, who could see the same impossible truth they were both grappling with. "So what do we do?" Ino asked eventually. "I don't know. But whatever's happening to us, we don't have to figure it out alone." Naruto reached across the table and covered her hand with his. The contact sent a jolt through him, not romantic exactly, but something deeper. Recognition. Partnership, the bone-deep certainty that this person understood him in ways no one else could. "Partners?" she asked, and there was something in her voice that made the word sound like a promise. "Partners," he agreed. As he walked home through the quiet streets later that evening, Naruto felt lighter than he had in weeks. The dreams and memories were still there, still confusing and overwhelming, but now he didn't have to carry that burden alone. Whatever was happening to them, whatever they were becoming, they'd face it together. He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the figure waiting by his apartment door. Jiraiya stepped out of the shadows, his expression grim in the streetlight. "We need to talk," his sensei said without preamble. "About what you and the Yamanaka girl discussed tonight." Naruto went cold. "You were watching us. I was protecting you. There's a lot going on that you don't understand yet, and until I know exactly what's happening to you both." Jiraiya shook his head. "Come on, the Hokage wants to see you." Now, as they walked toward the Hokage tower through the empty streets, Naruto caught sight of golden light flickering around his hands, faint, but definitely there. The same energy that had saved those civilians at Yukimura, responding to his emotional state like a living thing. "Iro Senin," he said quietly, "whatever this is, whatever's happening to us. It's not going away, is it?" "No," Jiraiya replied, his voice heavy with something that might have been regret. "I don't think it is." The golden light pulsed once, almost like a heartbeat, and for just a moment Naruto could swear he felt an answering pulse from somewhere across the village. From the direction of the flower shop where Ino was probably lying awake, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with dreams that weren't her own. "You're not alone," he thought toward that distant presence. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The light around his hands flared brighter, and he could have sworn he heard an echo of agreement carried on the night wind. The Hokage's office felt smaller than Naruto remembered. Maybe it was because he was taller now, or maybe it was the way his enhanced awareness automatically cataloged every scroll, every shadow, every potential threat in the room before he'd even consciously looked around. Either way, standing before Tsunade's desk at 3 in the morning with Jiraiya beside him, and that familiar golden energy humming just beneath his skin, everything felt different. "So," Tsunade said without preamble, setting aside a stack of reports that looked depressingly thick, "want to explain to me why half my intelligence network is buzzing about a genin who can suddenly coordinate military operations like a veteran jounin?" "I told you, Tsunade," Jiraiya interjected before Naruto could answer. "Something's happening to him, to both of them actually. The Yamanaka girl is showing similar. I can speak for myself, Iro Senin. Naruto's voice came out steadier than he felt. And honestly, Grandma Tsunade, I don't think I can explain it because I don't really understand it myself. Tsunade's eyebrow twitched at the nickname, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and studied him with those sharp eyes that missed nothing. Try me. So Naruto did. He told her about the dreams that felt like memories, the tactical knowledge that appeared overnight, the golden energy that responded to his emotions like a living thing. He told her about the vision during the bandit incident, about coordinating the defense of Yukimura with skills he'd never learned, about waking up crying for people he'd never met. The only thing he didn't mention was his conversation with Ino earlier that evening. Something told him that was private, at least for now. When he finished, Tsunade was quiet for a long time. Finally, she opened a desk drawer and pulled out a bottle of sake, pouring herself a cup and downing it in one swallow. 20 years, she said to no one in particular. 20 years as a medical ninja, and I thought I'd seen everything. She poured another cup. Jiroiya, your assessment. Either he's the most naturally gifted tactician in the history of the elemental nations, or something very unusual is inhabiting his body. Jiroiya's tone was clinical, but Naruto could hear the worry underneath. Given the timeline and the nature of the abilities manifesting, I'm leaning toward the latter. Inhabiting, Naruto felt cold all over. You think something's possessing me? Not possessing, Jiroiya said quickly. More like. Sharing space, or maybe merging would be a better word. You're still you, Naruto. Anyone can see that, but there's something else there too. Someone else, Tsunade corrected quietly. The question is who, and why now? She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the village that was just starting to show the first hints of dawn. I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you feel like these new abilities are part of you, or do they feel foreign? Naruto considered the question seriously. The tactical thinking, the enhanced awareness, even the golden energy, they all felt like putting on clothes that fit perfectly but weren't quite his style. Familiar but strange, natural but not native. Both, he said finally. It's like remembering how to ride a bike you've never owned. That's probably the most accurate description I've heard yet, Tsunade murmured. She turned back to face them. There are legends, old ones, about souls being reborn with memories of past lives. Usually it's just stories, folklore to explain child prodigies or unusual abilities. But occasionally, you think I'm the reincarnation of someone. The idea should have been ridiculous, but somehow it felt right, like a puzzle piece finally clicking into place. I think something extraordinary is happening, and we need to understand it before it becomes dangerous. Tsunade's expression was grave. These new abilities of yours, they're powerful, Naruto. More powerful than anything a genin should possess, and power without understanding is a recipe for disaster. So what do? We test you, carefully under controlled conditions, with people who can stop you if something goes wrong. She moved back to her desk and began pulling out scrolls. But first, you're going to rejoin your team. Sasuke's defection left Kakashi and Sakura, well, let's just say they need their teammate back. Sasuke, the name hit Naruto like a physical blow, bringing with it a surge of emotions that weren't entirely his own. Grief, yes, but also a strange kind of understanding. The knowledge that sometimes people chose their own path, even when that path led away from the people who cared about them. He made his choice, whispered that familiar voice in his mind. All you can do is be ready when he's ready to come home. I'll get him back, Naruto said with quiet conviction. Whatever it takes, I believe you will. Tsunade's smile was sad but genuine. But for now, focus on the team you have left. They've missed you more than they'll admit. The sun was fully up by the time Naruto finally made it home, exhausted but somehow energized at the same time. He had a few hours to rest before meeting Team 7 at Training Ground 3, and he intended to make the most of them. He'd barely gotten settled when there was a soft knock at his door. Naruto opened it to find Ino standing there with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that was equal parts determination and anxiety. Couldn't sleep either, she asked, holding out one of the cups. Not really. He accepted the coffee gratefully and stepped aside to let her in. I tried, but every time I closed my eyes I kept seeing that woman again, except this time she was giving orders to people who looked like they'd follow her into hell if she asked. Ino settled onto his couch with the familiar ease of someone who'd spent countless hours there during their academy days. The weird part is, I could understand every order she gave. Complex tactical maneuvers I've never heard of, but somehow they all made perfect sense. Naruto joined her on the couch, close enough that their shoulders touched. The contact was grounding somehow, like an anchor in the storm of confusion that had become his life. "I had a meeting with the Hokage," he said quietly. "I figured. Jiroya-sama came by the shop yesterday asking questions about my recent missions, my unusual tactical development." Ino's voice carried a note of bitter amusement. "Pretty subtle, right? They think we're reincarnations, people from past lives somehow waking up in new bodies." Ino was quiet for a moment, sipping her coffee. "That would explain a lot, actually. The memories, the skills, the way everything feels familiar and foreign at the same time. Doesn't freak you out, should it?" She turned to face him more fully. "I mean, think about it, Naruto, we're still us. I'm still the girl who used to compete with Sakura over Sasuke and spend too much time on my hair. You're still the knucklehead who ate nothing but ramen and declared he was going to be Hokage every 5 minutes. But now we're also more, Naruto repeated, tasting the word. "I like that better than possessed or inhabited." "Exactly." Ino reached out and took his hand, the same electric recognition from the night before sparking between them. "Whatever we were before, whoever these people in our dreams were, they're part of us now, and maybe that's not such a bad thing. Even if we don't know what it means yet. Especially then." Her smile was warm and sure. "Besides, we'll figure it out together, right? Partners." "Partners," Naruto agreed, and felt that golden energy pulse in response to the promise. They talked until it was time for him to meet his team, sharing fragments of dreams and half-understood memories, trying to piece together a picture of who they had been and who they were becoming. By the time Ino left, Naruto felt more centered than he had in weeks. Training Ground 3 looked exactly the same as it had 2.5 years ago, down to the 3 posts where they'd taken their first bell test. But everything else felt different as Naruto approached the familiar clearing. Sakura was there first, of course, sitting on one of the posts with a medical text open in her lap. She looked up at the sound of his footsteps and nearly dropped her book. "Naruto," she hopped down from the post, staring at him like she couldn't quite believe he was real. "When did you get so tall? Training with the pervy sage will do that to you." He grinned at her, but he was cataloging the changes in her too. She was stronger now, more confident, and there was something in her eyes that spoke of hard-won experience. "You look good, Sakura-chan, really good. You look," she paused, tilting her head slightly. "Different not just physically, there's something in the way you carry yourself now." "Yeah, I've been hearing that a lot lately." "Yo," Kakashi's voice came from above them, and they looked up to see their sensei perched in a tree with his ever-present book. My, look what the cat dragged in." "You're actually on time for once, Kakashi-sensei," Naruto observed. "Should I be worried? Probably." Kakashi dropped down to join them, and Naruto noticed that his single visible eye was studying him with the same sharp attention everyone else had been giving him lately. "So I hear you've been causing quite a stir." "So I'm told." "Well, before we get into that, how about we see if you remember the basics?" Kakashi reached into his pouch and pulled out 2 familiar silver bells. Round 2, this time, was different. The moment Kakashi called begin, Naruto's enhanced awareness kicked in automatically. He could sense Sakura moving to flank left while Kakashi prepared for his usual vanishing act, could feel the minute shifts in air pressure that would telegraph the Jounin's next move. More than that, he could see the entire engagement like a 3-dimensional chess board in his mind. Kakashi's likely strategies, Sakura's strengths and weaknesses, the terrain features that could be used to advantage. It was like having a tactical computer running calculations in the background of his thoughts. "Sakura," he called out, not taking his eyes off Kakashi. "Pincer movement, pattern 7. "Pattern 7, she called back, confused. "We never learned a pattern 7. Trust me." And somehow, she did. Naruto began moving in a complex pattern that forced Kakashi to counter in predictable ways, creating openings that Sakura instinctively exploited even though she couldn't have explained the strategy if asked. They worked together like they'd been training for years instead of minutes, their movements synchronized with an almost supernatural precision. The moment came when Kakashi overcommitted to a counterattack, leaving himself vulnerable for just an instant. Naruto moved faster than he'd ever moved before, his hand wreathed in golden energy that made his fingers feel like they could punch through steel. His fist connected with Kakashi's blocking arm, and the Jounin's eye went wide behind his mask as he was driven backward 3 feet by the impact. "What the hell was that?" Kakashi straightened slowly, flexing his arm like he was testing for damage. "I honestly don't know." Naruto stared at his hand where golden light still flickered around his knuckles. "It just happens when I need it to." "And the coordination?" Kakashi's voice was carefully neutral. "Where did you learn tactical patterns I've never heard of?" "Same answer, I'm afraid." Kakashi was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. Well, you got the bells, both of them. He held up the silver objects, and Naruto realized that somewhere during the exchange, he'd managed to grab them without even realizing it. How did I? Enhanced reflexes, improved spatial awareness, and what looked like precognitive combat instincts. Sakura had moved closer and was studying him with fascination rather than fear. Naruto, your body was reacting to attacks before Kakashi-sensei fully committed to them. That's not normal. None of this is normal, Naruto muttered. No, Kakashi agreed, but it's impressive as hell. And if the rumors I'm hearing are true, you're not the only one developing unusual abilities. Ino, Sakura said immediately. I heard she coordinated a 3-team operation last week like she had eyes everywhere at once. And some of the other rookies have been showing similar improvements, though nothing as dramatic as what we just saw. Naruto thought about his conversation with Ino that morning, about the sense of shared understanding that had passed between them. Maybe we're all just growing up. Maybe. But Kakashi didn't sound convinced. Or maybe something much more significant is happening. They spent the rest of the morning running through combat drills and tactical exercises, and it quickly became clear that Naruto's abilities went far beyond enhanced reflexes. He could coordinate multiple objectives simultaneously, predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, and adapt his strategies in real time as conditions changed. More unsettling was the way his teammates responded to his leadership. Both Sakura and Kakashi found themselves following his tactical suggestions without question, as if some part of them recognized the authority in his voice, even when his plans sounded impossible. It's like you've done this before, Sakura said during a break. Not just trained, but actually commanded people in real combat situations. That's because I have, Naruto said, then blinked in surprise at his own words. I think I have, in dreams or memories or whatever they are. Memories of what? Kakashi's voice was sharp with interest. Battles, big ones, ships and soldiers, and Naruto struggled to find words for the visions that felt more real than his own past. People who trusted me to keep them alive, and sometimes I couldn't. Sometimes I had to choose who to save and who to sacrifice, and those choices. He trailed off, overwhelmed by emotions that belonged to someone else but felt completely real. That's a hell of a burden for anyone to carry, Kakashi said quietly, especially someone your age. I don't think age has anything to do with it. Naruto looked at his hands, where golden energy still flickered faintly around his fingers. I think whoever I was before, they carried those memories for a very long time, and now they're mine too. The question, Sakura said thoughtfully, is what you're going to do with them. Use them to protect people, Naruto answered without hesitation. To be stronger, smarter, better at keeping the people I care about safe. Whatever else these abilities are for, that's what feels right. Even if you don't fully understand them yet, especially then. Naruto's smile was warm, but carried an edge of steel that hadn't been there before his training with Jiraiya. Besides, I won't be figuring it out alone. As if summoned by his words, Ino appeared at the edge of the training ground, moving with the same enhanced awareness that had become second nature to Naruto. She nodded to Sakura and Kakashi politely, but her attention was focused on Naruto with laser intensity. We need to talk, she said simply. More developments, he asked, already knowing the answer. You could say that. There was something in her voice that made the golden energy around his hands pulse brighter. I just had a very interesting conversation with my father about the nature of mind techniques and inherited memories. And I think we're about to become very busy. Naruto looked around at his teammates, Sakura watching with fascination, Kakashi with professional interest, and Ino with the kind of partnership that went beyond friendship, and felt a sense of rightness settle over him like a comfortable cloak. Whatever was coming next, whatever challenges these new abilities would bring, he wouldn't face them alone. He had his team, his partner, and most importantly, he had the wisdom of someone who'd faced impossible choices before and somehow found the strength to keep going. The golden light around his hands flared once more, and for just a moment, he could swear he felt an answering pulse from Ino. A promise, wordless but absolute. Whatever comes, we face it together. All right, he said, grinning at the faces around him. Let's get busy. The briefing room felt suffocating. Naruto sat at the rectangular table, trying to ignore the way every other person in the room kept stealing glances at him like he might spontaneously combust. Tsunade presided from the head of the table, flanked by Jiraiya and a handful of jounin he recognized, but had never worked with directly. Across from him, Sakura was doing her best to look professional despite the worry lines creasing her forehead. And beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her shoulder, Ino sat with perfect posture and an expression of focused calm that would have fooled anyone who didn't know her as well as he did. But Naruto could see the tension in the way she held her hands, could sense the low-level anxiety humming through their strange new connection. The mission is simple in concept, complex in execution, Tsunade was saying, but Naruto was only half listening. His enhanced awareness was picking up too many other details. The way Captain Yamato kept flexing his fingers like he was ready to use his wood release at a moment's notice. The subtle positioning of the AA Chenbu guards outside the door, the fact that Jiraiya hadn't touched his tea and kept glancing toward the window. They were all nervous about something, and Naruto was pretty sure that something was him. Intelligence suggests Sasuke will be at the Tenchai Bridge meeting, Tsunade continued, and suddenly Naruto was paying very close attention indeed. This could be our best chance to bring him home, or our best chance to walk into a trap, Yamato added grimly. Orochimaru isn't known for keeping appointments unless it serves his purposes. Which is why we're approaching this tactically, Tsunade said, and her eyes fixed on Naruto with uncomfortable intensity. This isn't a rescue mission, it's a reconnaissance and extraction operation. We gather intelligence, assess the situation, and only engage if we have overwhelming advantage. Overwhelming advantage against Orochimaru and whoever he's traveling with, Sakura's voice was carefully controlled. That seems optimistic. Under normal circumstances, yes, Tsunade leaned forward, but our intelligence suggests that Naruto's recent developments might give us options we haven't had before. There it was. Naruto felt the familiar golden energy stir beneath his skin, responding to the mixture of anticipation and anxiety flooding through him. They weren't just sending Team 7 on a mission, they were field testing whatever he was becoming. What kind of options? He asked quietly. That depends on you. Jiraiya spoke for the first time since the briefing began. Your tactical abilities have been impressive, but we need to know how they hold up under real pressure. Against opponents who won't pull their punches. You want to see if I can actually fight someone like Orochimaru. I want to see if you can outthink someone like Orochimaru, Tsunade corrected. Raw power won't be enough, but strategic superiority combined with the right support. She gestured to Ino, who straightened slightly. Yamanaka will be providing communication and coordination support. Her recent developments in long-range mental networking make her ideal for maintaining tactical overview. You're pairing us, Naruto realized. Officially. I'm recognizing what's already happening, Tsunade said bluntly. Whatever's going on with you two, it works. Your coordination during yesterday's exercises was beyond anything I've seen from ninja with decades of partnership experience. Naruto felt heat rise in his cheeks, but it was Ino who spoke. With respect, Hokage-sama, we're still figuring out what this even is. Putting us in the field against someone like Orochimaru while we're still learning to control our abilities is exactly the kind of pressure that tends to accelerate development, Yamato interrupted. Sometimes the only way to discover your limits is to push past them. Easy for you to say, Naruto muttered. You're not the one whose limits might explode and take out half a forest. Actually, Jiraiya said with a slight grin, I've seen your recent power displays. Taking out half a forest might be useful in this situation. The briefing continued for another hour, covering tactical approaches, contingency plans, and extraction procedures. But Naruto found his attention drifting to the way Ino's mind felt against the edges of his consciousness. Not intrusive, exactly, but present in a way that was both comforting and slightly unnerving. Can you hear this? He thought toward that presence, not really expecting an answer. Loud and clear came her mental voice, warm with amusement, though you might want to pay attention to the part about signal protocols. I have a feeling we're going to need them. When the briefing finally ended, Naruto found himself walking beside Ino toward the village gates, their gear packs slung over their shoulders and the weight of expectation pressing down like a physical thing. Second thoughts, she asked quietly. Third and fourth thoughts, he admitted. You, constantly. She paused at the gate, looking back at the village spread out behind them. But also excited. Is that weird? If it is, we're both weird. Naruto adjusted his pack straps, feeling the familiar weight of kunai and shuriken, but also something else. A sense of potential, like standing at the edge of a cliff and knowing you were about to jump. It feels right, doesn't it? Like this is what we're supposed to be doing. Yeah. Ino's smile was soft but determined. like we were built for this. They met up with the rest of the team at the rendezvous point, Sakura looking professionally composed despite her obvious worry, Yamato radiating the kind of calm competence that came from years of dangerous missions, and Sai. Well, Sai looked exactly the same as always, which was somehow both reassuring and vaguely unsettling. "All right," Yamato said once they were all assembled. "Standard formation for approach, but once we reach the bridge area, Naruto takes tactical command." "Everyone clear on that?" Sakura and Sai nodded, but Naruto could see the questions in Sakura's eyes. Taking tactical command meant making life-or-death decisions for people he cared about. The weight of that responsibility should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt natural. They moved through the forest at a steady pace, covering ground efficiently while maintaining awareness of their surroundings. But as they got closer to their destination, Naruto began to notice something strange happening to his perception of the world around him. It started as a subtle enhancement of his normal senses, being able to hear conversations from further away, catching scents that carried more information than they should. But gradually, it became something else entirely. He could sense the emotional states of small animals in the underbrush, could feel the presence of other humans like warm spots on a mental map that extended far beyond his visual range. Observation Haki whispered that familiar voice in his mind, "You're starting to awaken it properly." "Naruto," Ino's voice was tight with concern, "your chakra signature just spiked." "What's happening? I can feel them," he said quietly, not breaking stride. "3 people at the bridge, one of them is..." He paused, trying to process the complex emotional signature he was picking up. Conflicted. Angry but not entirely committed to being here. "Sasuke," Sakura breathed. "And the others?" Naruto concentrated, extending his newfound awareness carefully. "Cold, calculating, one of them feels like looking into an abyss." He shuddered slightly. "That's got to be Orochimaru. And the third, hostile, very hostile. Whoever it is, they're looking forward to a fight." Yamato called for a halt about half a mile from the bridge, and they huddled together to finalize their approach. The original plan had been straightforward reconnaissance, but Naruto's enhanced senses were providing intelligence they hadn't expected to have. "Change of plans," he said, and was surprised by how naturally the words of command came to him. "Ino, I need you to establish a mental link with everyone, full tactical network." "That's ambitious," she said carefully. "I've never tried linking more than 2 people at once." "You can do it." Naruto's confidence wasn't based on logic or past experience, it was pure instinct, the same way he knew that the golden energy would respond when he needed it. "I can feel how strong you've gotten. Trust yourself." Ino took a deep breath, then placed her hands on Yamato and Sakura's shoulders while maintaining contact with Naruto. The mental connection, when it came, was like stepping into a room full of familiar voices. "This is incredible," Sakura's mental voice carried a note of wonder. "It's like we're all thinking together." "Focus," Yamato's thoughts were crisp and professional. "What's the tactical assessment, Naruto?" Through the network, Naruto could share his enhanced perceptions directly. The team felt what he felt, the positions of the 3 figures at the bridge, their emotional states, even rough estimates of their chakra levels. "Orochimaru is confident," Naruto analyzed. "Too confident. He's not expecting a real fight, which means he probably has some kind of trap prepared. The third person, Kabuto maybe, is positioned for ambush. And Sasuke doesn't want to be here," Sakura finished, her mental voice tight with pain and hope. "He's conflicted about something." "That's our opening," Naruto decided. "We don't go in trying to fight Orochimaru directly. We extract Sasuke while he's emotionally vulnerable, and we do it fast enough that Orochimaru can't counter." "And if Sasuke doesn't want to be extracted?" Yamato's question was grim but necessary. Naruto was quiet for a moment, feeling the weight of command settle on his shoulders like a familiar cloak. When he answered, it was with the voice of someone who'd made impossible choices before, even if he couldn't quite remember when or where. "Then we make sure he knows he has the choice. But we don't leave anyone behind who wants to come home." The approach to Tenchai Bridge was a masterclass in coordinated movement. Through Ino's mental link, they moved like fingers on the same hand, Yamato and Sai circling to cut off escape routes, Sakura positioning herself for medical support or combat as needed, and Naruto and Ino advancing directly toward the bridge where 3 familiar figures waited. Sasuke looked older, harder, his dark hair longer and his clothes bearing the serpentine motifs of Sound Ninja. But his posture was tense in a way that had nothing to do with combat readiness, and when he spotted Naruto emerging from the tree line, His expression flickered through surprise, anger, and something that might have been relief. "Well, well," Orochimaru's voice carried across the water with silk-smooth menace. "How unexpected, though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised to see you, Naruto-kun, you always were." "Persistent, let him go." Naruto's voice was steady as he stepped onto the bridge, Ino just behind him and slightly to his left. "This doesn't have to end badly for everyone. Let him go." Orochimaru's laugh was like poisoned honey. "My dear boy, Sasuke-kun is here of his own free will. Aren't you, Sasuke-kun?" Sasuke's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer immediately. Through his enhanced senses, Naruto could feel the turmoil roiling beneath his former teammates' controlled exterior, doubt, guilt, longing, and underneath it all, a desperate need for the kind of power that could undo past mistakes. "Sasuke," Naruto said quietly, and his voice carried across the bridge like it was meant for his ears alone. "You don't have to do this anymore. Whatever you're looking for, whatever you think you need, we can find another way." "Another way?" Sasuke's voice was bitter. "There is no other way, Naruto. You don't understand. You've never understood. Maybe not before." Naruto took another step forward, and golden energy began to flicker around his hands. "But I understand now. I know what it's like to carry memories that aren't your own, to feel responsible for things that happened before you were even born. I know what it's like to think the only way forward is through power, no matter what it costs." Something in Sasuke's expression shifted. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that revenge never fixes anything. It just creates more pain, more loss, more reasons for the next person to seek revenge." Naruto's voice carried conviction born of experiences he couldn't quite remember but felt with absolute certainty. "I'm talking about the fact that there are people who care about you, who are willing to stand with you no matter what you've done, if you'll just let them." "How touching," Orochimaru interjected, but there was an edge to his voice now that hadn't been there before. "But I'm afraid Sasuke-kun has already made his choice." "Have you?" Naruto asked, looking directly at Sasuke. "Or did you just run out of better options?" Through the mental link, he felt Ino's sudden spike of alarm. Kabuto's moving, northwest, about to attack. Without breaking eye contact with Sasuke, Naruto reached out with his enhanced awareness and found the silver-haired medic ninja creeping through the shadows beneath the bridge. The attack, when it came, was fast and precisely aimed. But Naruto was already moving, his body flowing into a defensive position that felt like muscle memory from someone else's life. The golden energy around his hands flared brighter as he caught Kabuto's chakra scalpel between his palms. The medical technique that could cut through anything meeting the enhanced durability of what his borrowed memories insisted was armament haki. The collision sent shockwaves through the bridge supports, but Naruto held firm. "Impossible," Kabuto breathed, staring at his technique being casually blocked by bare hands wreathed in golden light. "Lot of that going around lately," Naruto replied, then twisted and threw the medic ninja into the river below with enough force to create a significant splash. The brief exchange had given Orochimaru time to move, though, and suddenly the Sannin was between Naruto and Sasuke with his sword extended toward Ino's throat. "Now then," Orochimaru purred, "I think we need to renegotiate the terms of this conversation." That's when everything changed. The golden energy that had been flickering around Naruto's hands suddenly blazed like a miniature sun, and he felt something vast and powerful unfold within his consciousness. The world slowed to a crawl as every muscle in his body became suffused with strength that felt infinite. Every sense expanded beyond normal human limits. But more than that, he could feel Ino through their connection, could sense her absolute trust in him, her unwavering certainty that he would find a way to save everyone. And somehow, that trust gave him access to something he'd only glimpsed before. Golden light erupted around him in the shape of a massive humanoid figure, translucent but solid, extending from his body like the ultimate expression of protective instinct. The Buddha construct was easily 20 feet tall, its multiple arms moving with impossible precision and speed. One hand caught Orochimaru's sword before it could reach Ino. Another snatched Kabuto out of the river and held him immobilized. A third reached out toward Sasuke, not to grab him, but simply extended in offering. "This is your choice, Sasuke," Naruto said, and his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Not his, not anyone else's. Yours." Through the mental link, everyone could feel what Naruto felt, not just the power, but the control. The golden construct could have crushed Orochimaru like an insect, but it held him gently but firmly, more concerned with protecting than destroying. "What are you?" Orochimaru whispered, his usually composed demeanor finally cracking. "Someone who's learned that power means nothing without people worth protecting," Naruto replied. Someone who's figured out that the strongest technique in the world is knowing when not to use it. Sasuke stared at the offered hand, his face cycling through a dozen different emotions. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I can't, not yet. There are things I have to do, things I have to understand before. I know. Naruto's voice was infinitely gentle. But when you're ready, when you found what you're looking for, we'll be here. All of us, even after everything I've done, especially then. The golden construct faded as gradually as it had appeared, leaving Naruto standing normally on the bridge with Ino beside him and his team positioned around them. Orochimaru and Kabuto were unharmed but clearly shaken, while Sasuke looked like he was seeing his former teammate with new eyes. This isn't over, Orochimaru said as he began to retreat, but there was none of his usual confidence in the threat. No, Naruto agreed, but it doesn't have to end the way you think it does. As the sound ninja disappeared into the forest, Sasuke paused at the edge of the bridge. For just a moment he looked back, and Naruto caught a glimpse of the boy they'd grown up with, uncertain, lonely, desperate for connection but afraid to reach for it. Naruto, Sasuke said quietly, that power. Be careful with it, power like that always comes with a price. So does not using it when people need you to, Naruto replied. I'll take my chances. Sasuke almost smiled at that. Then he was gone, vanished into the shadows after his temporary allies. The journey back to Konoha was subdued but not defeated. Through the mental link that Ino maintained with gradually increasing confidence, they processed what had happened, what it meant, and what came next. That wasn't a failure. Sakura's thoughts were firm despite her obvious disappointment. He heard you, really heard you, and he made his own choice, Yamato added. That's more than we could have hoped for under the circumstances. What about that construct? Sai's mental voice carried genuine curiosity. I've never seen anything like it. Neither have I, Naruto admitted, but it felt right, like it was always there, just waiting for the right moment. The right motivation, Ino corrected gently, and through their connection he could feel her understanding, her pride in what he'd accomplished, and underneath it all, something deeper that made his chest feel warm and tight at the same time. They made camp that evening in a clearing that offered good sight lines and defensible positions, not because they expected trouble, but because it had become second nature to think tactically about everything. As the others settled into their bedrolls, Naruto found himself sitting by the dying fire with Ino beside him, both of them staring into the flames. That was terrifying, she said quietly. Which part? All of it. The power, the responsibility, the way everyone just trusted you to make the right call. She turned to look at him, and there was something in her eyes that made his breath catch, but also incredible. The way you handled Orochimaru, the way you gave Sasuke a real choice instead of just trying to drag him home. That was the kind of leadership people would follow anywhere. People like you? The question slipped out before he could stop it, and he felt heat rise in his cheeks. Especially people like me. Her smile was soft and sure and full of promise. Whatever we're becoming, Naruto, whatever these abilities turn us into, I want to face it with you. All of it, the golden energy pulsed once around his hands, echoing the warmth spreading through his chest. And when Ino reached out to take his hand, the light flared brighter for just a moment before settling into a gentle, steady glow. They sat like that until the fire burned down to embers, hands linked and minds connected, two people discovering that being more than human was a lot less scary when you had someone to share it with. The debriefing room felt like a tomb. Naruto sat in the same chair he'd occupied 3 days ago, staring at his hands while Tsunade read through Yamato's mission report with increasing intensity. The golden energy that had blazed so brilliantly at the bridge was nowhere to be seen now, leaving him feeling strangely empty, like a lamp with the oil burned out. So let me understand this correctly, Tsunade said finally, setting the report aside. You manifested what can only be described as a chakra avatar powerful enough to restrain one of the legendary Sannin, demonstrated tactical coordination that impressed a veteran like Yamato, and managed to have an actual conversation with Sasuke instead of just trading jutsu. That's about the size of it, Naruto mumbled. And you consider this a failure? He's still out there, isn't he? Naruto looked up, and there was something raw in his expression that made everyone in the room go quiet. He's still with Orochimaru, still chasing power that's going to destroy him still. He trailed off, his hands clenching into fists. I had him right there, Grandma Tsunade. I had the power to stop all of this, and I let him walk away. You gave him a choice, Sakura said firmly from her seat across the table. That's not the same thing as letting him walk away. Is it? Naruto's voice was bitter in a way none of them had heard before. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I had the chance to save my best friend and I chose to be philosophical instead. The silence that followed was heavy with uncomfortable truths. Finally, it was Ino who spoke, her voice carrying the kind of gentle authority that came from shared understanding. "Walk with me," she said, not quite making it a request. Naruto almost refused. He wasn't in the mood for comfort or pep talks or whatever Ino thought she could offer. But something in her tone, some note of command that resonated with the tactical part of his brain, made him stand and follow her from the room. They walked through Konoha in silence, past the busy market streets and training grounds, until they reached the memorial stone where the names of fallen ninja were carved in black granite. Ino settled onto the grass in front of the monument, and after a moment, Naruto joined her. "You want to know what I've been dreaming about?" she asked without preamble. "Not really. A woman with purple hair standing over a grave. She's holding flowers, beautiful ones, the kind I've never seen before, and she's crying." Ino's voice was distant, like she was seeing the scene play out in front of her. "She keeps saying, 'I'm sorry, over and over, but not to the person in the grave, to someone who isn't there." Despite himself, Naruto found his attention caught. Who's she apologizing to? Someone she couldn't save. Someone she had to choose not to save because saving them would have meant letting other people die. Ino turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes. And the worst part is, she made the right choice. Tactically, strategically, mathematically, it was the correct decision, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. Naruto felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're not the first person to have this kind of power, this kind of responsibility. And you're not the first person to discover that sometimes the right choice and the choice that makes you happy aren't the same thing." Before Naruto could respond, the world tilted sideways and he was somewhere else entirely. A massive office overlooking a harbor full of warships. Reports scattered across a desk, each one representing dozens of lives lost or saved based on decisions made in this room. And standing at the window, a man in a white coat and Buddha mask, shoulders bent under the weight of command. "Sir," an aide's voice carefully neutral, "the families are asking about the memorial service." "For which ones?" The voice that came from Naruto's mouth was tired, ancient, carrying the weight of years he hadn't lived. "All of them, sir. The ones we lost at Marineford, the ones we lost covering the civilian evacuation, the ones we lost buying time for the medical ships to escape. They want to know when. Schedule them all. Whatever it costs, however long it takes, they earned that much." A pause, looking out at the flags flying at half-mast, "and make sure the records reflect that they died heroes, every single one of them. Even the ones who broke ranks. Who ran, especially those ones. Fear doesn't make you less of a person, it just makes you human." The aide left, and the man at the window continued his vigil, carrying the names and faces of everyone who'd trusted him to lead them home. Most of them had made it, but not all, never all. "I'm sorry, Ace," he whispered to the empty room. "I'm sorry, old friend, I should have found another way." Naruto gasped, the vision releasing him so abruptly he nearly fell over. Ino's hand was on his shoulder, steadying him, and her mental presence was a warm anchor in the storm of borrowed grief threatening to drown him. "His name was Sengoku," Naruto said quietly, not quite knowing where the words came from. "He was a leader, a good one, but he had to make choices that tore him apart inside. And in the end, he lost someone he cared about because he couldn't find a way to save everyone. And now his memories are yours," Ino said. "His experience, his regrets, his understanding of what leadership really costs. So what am I supposed to do with that?" Naruto's voice cracked slightly. "How am I supposed to use the wisdom of someone who failed when it mattered most?" "He didn't fail," Ino said with absolute conviction. "He saved thousands of people, protected entire nations, held the line against chaos for decades. The fact that he couldn't save one specific person doesn't erase all the lives he did save. But Ace was not Sasuke." Ino's voice was firm but gentle. "And you are not Sengoku, not entirely. You're Naruto Uzumaki, the knucklehead who never gives up, who finds solutions nobody else can see, who refuses to accept that anyone is beyond saving." "Then why does it hurt so much?" The question came out like a confession. "Why does it feel like I've lost him all over again when I never had him to begin with?" "Because caring about people always hurts when you can't protect them. That's not a bug in the system, Naruto, it's a feature. The moment you stop hurting, the moment you start thinking of people as acceptable losses instead of individuals worth saving, that's when you become the kind of leader who shouldn't have power." Naruto was quiet for a long time, processing her words against the backdrop of borrowed memories that felt as real as his own childhood. Finally, he spoke. At the bridge, when I manifested that construct, I could have forced him to come home. The power was there, the opportunity was there. I could have knocked out Orochimaru, grabbed Sasuke, and been gone before anyone could stop me. But you didn't. But I didn't. He looked at the memorial stone, at all those names representing people who'd made their own choices about what was worth fighting for. Because forcing someone to accept help isn't really helping them, it's just making yourself feel better about your inability to fix their problems. And Sasuke has to want to come home for it to mean anything. He has to choose to trust us, to believe that there's something worth coming back for. I can't make that choice for him. Naruto's voice grew stronger as he spoke, as if saying the words out loud was helping him believe them. All I can do is make sure that when he's ready, we're still here. Even if it takes years, even if he does terrible things while he's finding his way, even then. The golden energy flickered back to life around Naruto's hands, but gentler now, warmer. Because that's what you do for family. You keep the door open, no matter how long it takes them to walk through it. Ino smiled, and there was something in her expression that made Naruto's chest feel tight in the best possible way. There's the Naruto I know, the one who finds solutions nobody else can see. Yeah, well, I had a good teacher. He bumped her shoulder with his. This thing we're doing, this partnership or whatever it is, I don't think I could handle it without you. You won't have to. The words came out more intensely than either of them had expected, hanging in the air between them like a promise. Whatever comes next, whatever we're becoming, we figure it out together. Together, Naruto agreed, and when he reached out to take her hand, the golden light flared brighter, echoing the warmth spreading through both their chests. They sat like that as the sun set over Konoha, hands linked and minds connected through whatever strange bond they were developing. It should have been awkward. They were barely 16, still figuring out who they were individually, let alone what they meant to each other. But somehow it felt right, like the most natural thing in the world. Ino, Naruto said eventually, his voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, when all this is over, when we've figured out what these abilities mean and what we're supposed to do with them, would you maybe want to try being something more than partners? She turned to look at him fully, and her smile was soft and sure and full of possibilities. Naruto Uzumaki, are you asking me out? I think I'm asking you to share whatever comes next. All of it, the good parts and the scary parts and everything in between. That's a big ask. It's a big world. Seems like the kind of thing you'd want to face with someone you trust. Someone you trust or someone you're falling in love with. The question hung between them, honest and vulnerable and terrifying in its simplicity. Naruto could feel his heart racing, could sense Ino's nervous anticipation through their mental connection, could practically taste the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Both, he said finally. Definitely both. Ino's answering smile was radiant. Good, because I was starting to worry I was the only one feeling it. When she leaned in to kiss him, it was soft and tentative and perfect. The golden energy around Naruto's hands pulsed in harmony with whatever power Ino carried, creating a brief nimbus of light that probably would have been visible from space if anyone had been looking. But neither of them cared about subtlety right now. They'd found something worth protecting in each other, something worth fighting for, something worth building a future around. And maybe that was what Sengoku's memories were really trying to teach him. Not that leadership was about making perfect decisions, but that it was about finding people worth making imperfect decisions for. So, Ino said when they finally broke apart, her forehead resting against his. What happens now? Now we go back to the debriefing, we tell Tsunade that the mission was a qualified success, and we start preparing for whatever comes next. Naruto's grin was pure mischief and determination. But first, we practice coordinating our abilities, because if we're going to be partners in everything, we might as well be really good at it. Everything, Ino raised an eyebrow. Everything, Naruto confirmed, and the promise in his voice made her shiver in the best possible way. They walked back to the Hokage tower hand in hand, talking quietly about tactical applications and power development and the dozen other practical concerns that came with their unusual situation. But underneath the strategic planning was something deeper. The knowledge that they'd found someone who understood not just their abilities, but the weight that came with them. When Tsunade saw them enter the debriefing room together, her expression shifted from professional concern to knowing amusement. Well, she said, settling back in her chair, I take it you've resolved your concerns about the mission. You could say that, Naruto replied, and his voice carried a confidence that hadn't been there before. I've realized that sometimes success isn't about achieving your primary objective. Sometimes it's about setting up the conditions for future success. And those conditions would be Sasuke knows he has a choice. He knows we'll be here when he's ready, and he knows that whatever power he thinks he needs, there are other ways to get it. Naruto's smile was warm but edged with steel. Most importantly, he knows he's not facing the future alone, and neither are we. Tsunade's gaze shifted to their joined hands, then back to their faces. I see, and this new partnership won't interfere with your duties. On the contrary, Ino said smoothly, I think you'll find our coordination has improved significantly. Show me. What followed was a demonstration of tactical cooperation that bordered on supernatural. Moving in perfect synchronization, they ran through combat scenarios, communication exercises, and strategic planning sessions that showcased abilities far beyond their individual capabilities. It was like watching a single person with 4 hands and 2 brains, each component enhancing the other in ways that defied conventional understanding. Impressive, Tsunade said when they finally stopped, both of them barely winded despite the intensity of the exercises. I'm officially assigning you as permanent partners, effective immediately. Congratulations, you're now the youngest 2-person tactical unit in Konoha's history. As they left the Hokage Tower that evening, fingers intertwined and minds still buzzing with shared possibilities, Naruto felt something he hadn't experienced since the dreams began. Complete certainty about the path forward. He couldn't save everyone. He couldn't force people to make the choices he thought were best for them. He couldn't undo the mistakes of his borrowed past or guarantee that his own decisions would always work out perfectly. But he could stand with the people he cared about. He could offer them his strength, his loyalty, and his unwavering belief that there was always another way, always another chance, always hope for something better. And with Ino beside him, sharing the weight of impossible choices and the joy of unexpected victories, he was starting to think that might be enough. The golden light around their joined hands pulsed once more as they walked through the evening streets of Konoha, and if anyone had asked either of them in that moment whether they were ready for whatever came next, they would have answered with absolute conviction. Together, they were ready for anything. The warning came at dawn, carried on a wind that tasted of rain and blood. Naruto jerked awake in his apartment, his enhanced senses screaming danger before his conscious mind could process what had triggered them. Through the walls, through the sleeping village, through miles of forest and stone, he could feel something wrong approaching Konoha. Multiple somethings, actually, each one radiating the kind of cold malevolence that made his borrowed memories shudder with recognition. Battle stations, whispered Sengoku's voice in his mind. This is what we trained for. By the time Ino knocked on his door 3 minutes later, Naruto was already dressed and armed, his tactical mind running through defensive scenarios at lightning speed. You feel it too, she said without preamble, stepping into his apartment with the fluid grace that had become second nature to both of them. 6 of them, maybe 7. Coming from all directions at once. Naruto moved to his window, staring out at the peaceful village that had no idea it was about to become a battlefield. This isn't a raid or reconnaissance. This is total war. Akatsuki has to be. Nobody else would coordinate an attack this complex. He turned to face her, and she could see the strategic part of his mind already working through the problem. Ino, I need you to reach out to every mind you can touch. Wake up the Jounin first, then the Chunin, then anyone else with combat training. Tell them to implement Emergency Protocol 7. Emergency Protocol 7, Ino blinked. Naruto, there is no Emergency Protocol 7. There is now. He moved to his gear closet, pulling on the specially designed vest that could channel his chakra more efficiently. Civilian evacuation to the center of the village, combat units in concentric defensive rings, priority protection for the hospital and the academy. You coordinate communications, I coordinate tactics. That's actually a really good plan. How did you? I've been thinking about this scenario for weeks. Naruto's voice was grim. Ever since the bridge, I've been running contingencies for what happens when Akatsuki finally decides to stop playing games and just take what they want. Ino closed her eyes, her chakra flaring as she reached out with her enhanced mental abilities. In the months since their partnership had begun, her range and precision had grown exponentially. Where once she could barely maintain contact with one person at close range, now she could coordinate dozens of minds across the entire village. All Jounin, priority alert, her mental voice echoed through the minds of Konoha's elite. Coordinated attack incoming, multiple hostiles, implement defensive positions immediately. This is not a drill. The response was instantaneous. Across the village, lights began appearing in windows as experienced ninjas snapped into combat readiness. Within minutes, Ino had established mental links with every combat-capable person in Konoha, creating a communication network that would allow for real-time tactical coordination on a scale never before attempted. "Network established," she reported, opening her eyes. 47 Jounin, 132 Chunin, and about 300 Genin and retired personnel. Everyone's asking the same question though, how do we know what's coming? "Because I can feel them," Naruto said simply. "Their emotions, their intentions, even rough estimates of their capabilities." Observation Haki is getting stronger. He paused, his head tilting slightly as if listening to something only he could hear. "They're not just here for me, this is bigger than that. They want to break us to prove that nowhere is safe from them. Then we prove them wrong." Through the mental network, they could feel the village coming alive with purposeful movement. Teams taking positions, civilians being quietly evacuated to reinforced shelters, medical personnel preparing for casualties. It was like watching a sleeping giant wake up and flex its muscles. "Contact," came Shikamaru's mental voice through the network. "Eastern perimeter, single hostile, but Naruto, you need to see this." The image that flashed through the network made Naruto's blood run cold. A man with orange hair and multiple piercings, wearing a black cloak with red clouds, standing calmly in the middle of a crater where the eastern gate used to be. But it wasn't his appearance that was terrifying. It was the absolute lack of anything resembling human emotion radiating from him. "Pain," Naruto breathed, recognizing the name from intelligence reports even though he'd never seen the man before. "This is him. This is their leader. All units, this is Hokage actual." Tsunade's mental voice cut through the network with military precision. "Confirmed Akatsuki assault, multiple vectors. Naruto, you have tactical command for defensive operations. I'll coordinate medical and evacuation." The trust implicit in that statement should have been overwhelming, but instead Naruto felt that familiar sense of rightness settle over him like armor. This was what he'd been preparing for, what all those borrowed memories and tactical insights had been leading up to. "Ino, I need full situational awareness," he said, moving toward the door. "Every hostile, every friendly, every civilian who hasn't made it to shelter yet. You've got it." Her mental presence expanded like an opening flower, touching every mind in the village and painting a three-dimensional picture of the developing battle in both their heads. What they saw was terrifying in its complexity. 6 figures in Akatsuki cloaks approaching from different directions, each one radiating enough chakra to level city blocks. But worse than their individual power was their coordination. They were moving in perfect synchronization, timing their attacks to maximize chaos and minimize the defender's ability to respond effectively. "It's not random," Naruto realized as they ran through the streets toward the village center. "They're hurting us, forcing civilian evacuations toward specific areas, pushing our combat units into predetermined positions. Why would they want to control where we go? Because they're not just trying to capture me. They're trying to capture the village's spirit, to prove that even our home isn't safe." Naruto's voice carried grim understanding. "Pain wants to break our will to fight before the real battle even begins." The first explosion came from the north, a blast of chakra that shattered windows 3 blocks away. Through the mental network, they felt the surge of panic from civilians and the grim determination of the ninja moving to intercept. "Northern team in contact," came Kakashi's voice. "Hostile appears to be using some kind of gravitational manipulation. Massive destruction capability." "Copy that," Naruto responded, his tactical mind already adapting to the new information. "All northern units, maintain distance and use ranged attacks only. Do not attempt close combat until we understand the technique better." Southern perimeter reporting, Might Guy's mental voice was tight with concern. "Hostile here seems to be absorbing our jutsu. Everything we throw at him just makes him stronger." "Switch to taijutsu and physical weapons," Naruto ordered without hesitation. "If he absorbs chakra-based attacks, hit him with things that are just physics and momentum." The coordination was flawless, each order transmitted instantly to every relevant mind through Ino's network. But even with perfect communication, Naruto could feel the battle turning against them. The Akatsuki members weren't just powerful, they were specifically designed to counter conventional ninja tactics. "We need to change the game," he told Ino as they reached the Hokage Tower, where Tsunade was coordinating medical response from a reinforced command center. "Change it how? By doing something they won't expect." Naruto's eyes blazed with golden light as he extended his enhanced senses to their absolute limit. Pain's real body isn't here. These are all puppets, remote-controlled constructs with individual abilities but a single controlling intelligence. "How can you tell?" because I can feel the strings. Through the mental network, he shared his perception, thin lines of chakra connecting each of the attacking figures to a single point outside the village. He's controlling them from a distance, which means he can only focus on so many things at once. All units, new tactical directive, Naruto's mental voice carried absolute authority. The hostiles are remotely controlled. Coordinate your attacks to force the controller to divide his attention. Hit multiple targets simultaneously with everything you've got. The response was immediate and devastating. Instead of 6 separate battles, the conflict became a single coordinated engagement, with Konoha's forces striking at all Pain's bodies at once. The difference was immediately apparent. Techniques that had been blocked or countered moments before suddenly found their marks as Pain's attention was stretched beyond his ability to micromanage. But the reprieve was temporary. As the dust settled from the initial coordinated assault, it became clear that while they damaged several of Pain's bodies, they hadn't destroyed any of them. Worse, the assault seemed to have angered their opponent. Incoming, Shikamaru's mental voice carried desperate urgency. Something big, centered on the village. The words were cut off as Pain's Shinra Tensei devastated the northern quarter of Konoha, a massive repulsive force that flattened buildings and sent debris flying for miles. Through the mental network, they felt the cascade of pain and terror from civilians caught in the blast. No more playing defense, Naruto snarled, golden energy blazing around him like a star. Ino, I need you to maintain the network while I engage directly. Naruto, wait, but he was already moving, his body wreathed in golden light as he leaped from the Hokage tower toward the center of destruction. As he fell, the light around him began to take shape. First just a glow, then a translucent outline, then a fully manifested construct of golden energy 20 feet tall and radiating power that made the air itself thrum with potential. The Buddha construct landed in the ruins of what had been a residential district with earth-shaking force. Its multiple arms moving with impossible precision to lift debris and clear pathways for trapped civilians. But even as it worked to save lives, its primary attention was focused on the figure of Pain standing calmly in the center of the devastation. So, Pain said, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos around them, you're the one Jiraiya-sensei spoke of. The child who dreams of being Hokage. I don't dream of it anymore, Naruto replied, and his voice carried the weight of borrowed authority even as his construct continued evacuating civilians. I'm living it. Right here, right now, protecting these people from someone who's forgotten what it means to care about anyone but himself. Care, Pain's laugh was cold as winter steel. You speak of caring while living in a village built on violence, protected by child soldiers, funded by the suffering of smaller nations. Tell me, child, how many people has Konoha killed in the name of protecting its own? Too many, Naruto admitted, and the honesty in his voice seemed to surprise Pain. Way too many, but that doesn't mean the answer is killing more people. It means finding a better way. There is no better way, Pain's voice cracked with ancient anguish. I tried peace, tried cooperation, tried believing that people could change. All it brought was more death, more suffering, more children dying for the ambitions of their leaders. The Buddha construct paused in its rescue efforts, and for a moment, Naruto really looked at his opponent, not as an enemy to be defeated, but as a person carrying pain that felt achingly familiar. You're right, he said quietly. The system is broken. People in power make decisions that cost other people their lives, and most of the time they don't even have to see the consequences up close. Pain's expression flickered with something that might have been surprise. But destroying everything and starting over isn't the answer either, Naruto continued, his construct resuming its rescue work even as he spoke. Because the next system will be built by the same kind of people who broke this one. The only way to really change things is to be better ourselves, to make different choices, to prove that there's another way. Pretty words from someone who's never watched everyone he cares about die. Haven't I? Naruto's voice carried the weight of Sengoku's memories, decades of watching friends fall, of making impossible choices, of carrying the guilt of survival. You think I don't know what it's like to lose people, to feel responsible for deaths that maybe you could have prevented if you'd been stronger, smarter, faster. Through Ino's mental network, every mind in the village could feel the sincerity behind his words, the genuine understanding of loss and responsibility, and the terrible weight of command. The difference between us, Naruto said, his Buddha construct now holding a dozen rescued civilians in its gentle grasp, is that I decided to use that pain to protect people instead of destroying them. Every person I couldn't save taught me something about how to save the next one. And when that's not enough, When the system fails again, when more innocents die because you chose mercy over justice, then I'll carry that weight too. The golden construct pulsed brighter. But I won't let the fear of making mistakes stop me from trying to do better. Pain was quiet for a long moment, studying the figure before him, a teenager in a golden avatar, simultaneously conducting rescue operations and having a philosophical debate in the middle of a battlefield. You remind me of someone, Pain said finally, someone who believed in ideals like yours. What happened to them? They died, and their death taught me that ideals are luxuries the world can't afford. No, Naruto said with gentle certainty. Their death taught you that ideals are the only things worth dying for. The question is whether you're going to honor their memory by building something better or dishonor it by tearing everything down. Around them, the battle continued, Konoha's forces engaging Pain's other bodies with the coordinated precision that Ino's network allowed. But here, in the eye of the storm, two people who'd lost everything were having a conversation about what it meant to keep going anyway. It should have been a moment of perfect understanding, of connection across the divide of different choices made in response to similar pain. Instead, it was when everything went wrong. Naruto, Ino's mental voice cut through the moment like a blade. New hostile, incoming fast, power signature unlike anything I've felt before. The attack came from above, not one of Pain's bodies, but something else entirely. A figure in an orange mask, moving with speed that defied physics, aiming not for Naruto, but for the civilians his construct was protecting. Without thinking, Naruto threw every bit of power he had into defending them. The Buddha construct blazed like a miniature sun as it interposed itself between the masked figure and the innocents, taking the full force of an attack that sent shockwaves through the village foundations. When the light faded, Naruto was on his knees in the rubble, golden energy flickering weakly around him. The civilians were safe, but the effort had drained him more than he'd expected. How touching, the masked figure said, landing gracefully nearby. The famous Naruto Uzumaki exhausting himself to save a handful of strangers. Who are you? Naruto gasped, struggling to his feet. Someone who understands the futility of your ideals far better than he does. The masked man gestured toward Pain, who was watching the interaction with obvious displeasure. Tell me, child, was it worth it? Protecting those few people while leaving yourself vulnerable to someone who could kill thousands more. It was the same test Sengoku had faced a dozen times. The choice between immediate compassion and strategic thinking, between saving the people in front of you and preserving your strength for the greater battle ahead. But Naruto's answer came without hesitation. Every time, because that's what makes us human, caring about individuals, not just numbers. The masked man laughed, but there was no humor in it. Spoken like someone who's never had to choose between his humanity and his responsibilities. I choose both, Naruto said, golden energy beginning to flare around him again. I choose to be human and responsible, to care about people and protect them, to have ideals and the strength to make them real. Through the mental network, he could feel Ino's presence like a warm beacon, lending him strength even from across the battlefield. Could feel the determination of every ninja still fighting, every civilian still hoping, every person who believed that tomorrow could be better than today. Ino, he said through their connection, his voice carrying love and determination and absolute trust. Whatever happens next, remember what we talked about. Sometimes the right choice and the easy choice aren't the same thing. I remember, her mental voice was fierce with pride and fear and unwavering support. I remember everything. And I believe in you. The golden energy around Naruto blazed brighter, fed by that faith, by the connection they'd built, by the knowledge that even if he fell here, the ideals he'd fought for would live on in the people he'd inspired. All right, he said, facing down Pain and the masked man and whatever other horrors they had in store. Let's finish this. The Buddha construct reformed around him, larger and more solid than ever before, its multiple hands moving in patterns that spoke of protection and defiance, and the unshakable belief that some things were worth fighting for no matter the cost. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of battle continuing, his friends and allies and fellow citizens holding the line, buying time, refusing to give up hope even when the odds seemed impossible. Together, he thought toward Ino's distant presence. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together came her answering promise, carrying all the warmth and strength and love that had made him believe in the possibility of a better world. And with that promise ringing in his mind like a battle cry, Naruto Uzumaki prepared to discover just how much his ideals were really worth. The golden Buddha construct towered above the ruins of Konoha like a monument to defiance, its multiple hands weaving through complex defensive patterns, while Naruto's enhanced senses tracked every movement of his opponents. Pain stood to his left, that terrible emptiness in his chakra signature unchanged despite their conversation. The masked man circled to his right, moving with predatory patience that set every tactical instinct screaming. Two-front engagement, unknown capabilities on the secondary opponent, Sengoku's voice analyzed from the depths of his consciousness. Prioritize information gathering while maintaining defensive posture. But Naruto's own voice answered back, carrying all the stubborn optimism that had carried him this far. No, prioritize ending this without more people dying. Through Ino's mental network, he could feel the pulse of the village around him, wounded but unbroken, afraid but still fighting. Dozens of smaller battles raged across Konoha as the remaining pain bodies continued their assault, but the coordinated defense was holding. Barely. "Ino," he murmured, knowing she would hear him across the miles between them. "How are our people holding up?" Better than expected. Her mental voice carried exhaustion but also fierce pride. Gai-sensei and Lee have the southern team locked down, Kakashi's figured out how to counter the absorption technique, and Shikamaru's got the western approach turned into a tactical nightmare for anyone trying to advance. A pause, but Naruto, our people are getting tired. Whatever you're going to do, it needs to happen soon. I know. The Buddha construct shifted, its stance becoming more aggressive as Naruto made his choice. Just trust me, okay? This is going to get weird. When doesn't it with you? Despite everything, he could hear the smile in her mental voice. I've got your back, always. The warmth of that promise gave him the strength to do something that would have been impossible just months ago. He split his attention, using Sengoku's tactical expertise to engage both opponents simultaneously while maintaining awareness of the broader battle through Ino's network. "You want to know what I learned from my dreams?" Naruto called out, his Buddha construct's primary arms reaching toward Pain while secondary appendages tracked the masked man's movement. "I learned that the strongest technique in the world isn't about destruction, it's about connection." Pain's eyebrows rose slightly. Connection? The ability to understand what someone else is feeling, what they've lost, what they're afraid of losing. One of the construct's hands moved in a gesture that was pure compassion, open palm, fingers extended in offering rather than threat. "I can feel your pain, Pain. The weight of everyone you couldn't save, the guilt of surviving when they didn't, the desperate need to make their deaths mean something." "Pretty words," the masked man interjected, his voice carrying cold amusement. "But words won't stop what's coming." "No," Naruto agreed, and suddenly two of his construct's arms were moving with lightning speed toward the masked figure. But understanding might. The attack should have connected. Naruto had calculated the trajectory perfectly, accounting for the man's speed and probable evasion patterns. Instead, his fist passed harmlessly through his target like he was made of mist. Intangibility, Sengoku's tactical mind noted with clinical interest. Spatial temporal manipulation, possibly dimensional phasing. Threat assessment revised upward, but Naruto's own instincts were focused elsewhere. The attack hadn't been meant to damage, it had been meant to test, and the test had revealed something interesting. "You can't stay intangible forever," he observed, noting the brief moment when the masked man had solidified to avoid overbalancing. "Which means there's a pattern, a limitation. Something that forces you to become solid." "Clever boy." The masked man's voice carried a note of respect, but cleverness won't save your village. Maybe not alone. The Buddha construct's attention shifted back to Pain, and this time when Naruto spoke, his voice carried the weight of genuine understanding. "But I'm not alone. None of us are if we're willing to reach out." Through the mental network, he opened himself completely, not just to Ino, but to every mind she was connected to. Every ninja still fighting, every civilian huddled in the shelters, every person who called Konoha home. For just a moment, they all felt what he felt. The crushing weight of responsibility, the desperate love for people he'd never met, the unshakable belief that tomorrow could be better than today if someone was willing to fight for it. And in return, he felt them. Their fear, yes, but also their hope. Their exhaustion, but also their determination. Their individual pain, but also their collective strength. "This is what you've forgotten," Naruto said to Pain, his construct now blazing with golden light that seemed to come from hundreds of sources rather than just one. "Pain shared is pain halved. Strength shared is strength doubled. You've been carrying your burden alone for so long, you've forgotten what it feels like to have people stand with you." Pain's expression flickered, not with anger or dismissal, but with something that might have been longing. "They all died," he said quietly. "Everyone who stood with me, everyone who believed in peace, everyone who thought we could build something better. They all died and I couldn't save any of them." "I know." And Naruto did know, through Sengoku's memories of loss and failure and the terrible weight of command. I know how that feels, how it eats at you, how it makes you want to tear the world apart and rebuild it so that kind of loss can never happen again. The Buddha construct stepped closer to Pain, its massive form somehow conveying gentleness rather than threat. But they didn't die for nothing. They died believing in something better, and that belief doesn't die with them. It lives on in the people who remember them, who carry their dreams forward, who refuse to let their sacrifice be meaningless. And when those people die too, when the dream fails again and again, then we pick it up and carry it forward anyway. The construct's hand reached out not to attack but to offer comfort, because the alternative is letting their deaths mean nothing. The alternative is proving that the people who hurt them were right all along. Through the mental network, Naruto could feel the village holding its breath. The battle had paused, every participant, friend and foe alike, focused on this moment of connection between two people who had lost everything and chosen different paths forward. "You remind me of him," Pain said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jiraiya-sensei. Even at the end, he believed people could change, could be better. What do you think he would want you to do now?" Pain closed his eyes, and for the first time since the attack began, some of the terrible emptiness in his chakra signature eased. "He would want me to try," Pain said. "One more time. Even knowing it might fail, even knowing it might cost everything, he would want me to try." The words hung in the air like a prayer, and Naruto felt something shift in the fundamental nature of the confrontation. This was no longer a battle between enemies. It was a conversation between people who had suffered and were trying to figure out how to carry that suffering forward without letting it consume them. But the masked man had other ideas. "How touching," he said, and his voice carried a venom that made the air itself feel poisonous. "But I'm afraid I can't allow this touching reunion to continue." The attack came from a dozen directions at once, not physical strikes, but something worse. Reality seemed to twist around them, space folding in ways that made Naruto's enhanced senses scream in confusion. Through the mental network, he felt Ino cry out in pain as the distortion interfered with her abilities. "Naruto," her mental voice was strained with effort. "Whatever he's doing, it's breaking the connection. I can't maintain the network much longer." "Then don't," Naruto replied, and his voice carried absolute trust. "Come to me. All of you, everyone who can move, come here right now. Let's end this together." What followed was something that had never been attempted in the history of the ninja world, a coordinated convergence of every able-bodied fighter in Konoha, all moving toward a single point with perfect timing and absolute trust in their impromptu commander. Kakashi arrived first, appearing in a swirl of lightning that earthed itself through the Buddha construct's frame. Guy was a heartbeat behind, his green blur of motion adding kinetic energy to the growing formation. Shikamaru and his father brought tactical coordination that made the construct's movements even more precise. Ino came last, but her arrival changed everything. The moment her hand touched the construct's golden surface, the mental network exploded back into full strength, not just connecting the fighters around them, but extending through the entire village, linking every mind that was willing to be part of something greater than themselves. "This is what you're fighting," Naruto said to the masked man, his Buddha construct now blazing with the combined will of thousands of people. "Not just me, not just a few elite ninja, but an entire community that's decided to stand together." "Impressive," the masked man admitted, but his voice carried no fear. "But ultimately meaningless. I've seen communities before, I've seen them burn. Then you haven't seen one like this." The golden light around the Buddha construct suddenly expanded, not in a destructive explosion, but in a wave of pure protective intent. Every person it touched felt stronger, faster, more aware. Every injury began to heal a little quicker. Every fear became a little easier to face. More importantly, every person felt the connection to Naruto, to Ino, to each other. For the first time in the village's history, everyone truly understood that they were part of something bigger than themselves, something worth fighting for, something worth dying for if necessary. "This is the dream your friend believed in," Naruto said to Pain, extending his hand once more. "Not world domination through fear, not peace through mutual annihilation, but connection, understanding. The kind of strength that comes from standing with people instead of over them." Pain looked at the offered hand, then at the masked man who had presumably been his ally, then at the village full of people who were choosing hope over fear despite everything they'd just endured. "Nagato," he said quietly, and Naruto realized the man was talking to himself or to someone else entirely. "What do you think? One more chance?" The answer came not in words but in action. Pain reached out and grasped Naruto's golden hand, and the moment their chakras connected, something extraordinary happened. The Rin rebirth technique activated not as a desperate final gambit, but as a conscious choice. Every person who had died in the attack, every ninja, every civilian, every innocent caught in the crossfire, suddenly drew breath again. The technique should have killed Pain, should have consumed his life force entirely. Instead, it drew power from the network of connected minds, distributing the cost across thousands of willing participants. Everyone gave a little, so Pain didn't have to give everything. Impossible, the masked man breathed, staring at the resurrection unfolding around them. No, Naruto said with absolute certainty. Just unprecedented. Just what happens when people decide to share the burden instead of carrying it alone. But even as life returned to the village, even as families were reunited and the dead walked among the living once more, Naruto knew this wasn't over. The masked man was still there, still dangerous, still committed to whatever dark vision drove him. "This changes nothing," the man said, his voice carrying ancient bitterness. "You've saved them today, but tomorrow will bring new threats, new pain, new losses. How long can you maintain this connection? How long before people decide the cost is too high?" "As long as it takes," Ino answered, stepping up beside Naruto within the construct's embrace. "As long as there are people worth protecting, as long as there are dreams worth fighting for, as long as there's hope for something better." Pretty words from children who have never seen real war. "Haven't we?" Naruto's voice carried the weight of Sengoku's memories, decades of conflict, of impossible choices, of watching friends die and enemies grieve and innocent people caught between forces beyond their control. "Haven't I seen enough war to know that it never actually solves anything? That victory just means you get to clean up the mess while the other side plans their comeback." The Buddha construct shifted, its stance becoming less aggressive but more determined. "The only way to win a war is to refuse to fight it," Naruto continued. "To find the thing everyone actually wants, safety, security, a future for their children, and build that together instead of tearing each other apart over how to get there. And when that fails, when cooperation becomes exploitation, when trust becomes weakness, when peace becomes complacency that allows the next tragedy to happen, then we learn from the failure and try again. Better, smarter, with more safeguards and more inclusion and more understanding of what went wrong last time." Naruto's smile was sad but unshakable. "Because the alternative is giving up on the idea that things can ever get better, and I'm not ready to do that." "Neither am I," Pain added quietly. "Not anymore." The masked man stared at them for a long moment, at Naruto and Ino united within their golden construct, at Pain standing with his former enemies, at the village full of people who had chosen hope over fear and connection over isolation. "This isn't over," he said finally. "This peace you've built, this connection you've forged, it won't last. And when it fails, when people remember that trust is a luxury they can't afford, I'll be waiting." "We know," Naruto replied. "But we'll be waiting too, all of us together, ready to remind people that there's always another choice." The masked man's form began to fade, reality bending around him as he prepared to depart. But just before he disappeared entirely, he spoke one last time. The name was Obito Uchiha. Remember that when you're trying to figure out what went wrong. Then he was gone, leaving behind only questions and the fading echo of something that might have been grief. In the silence that followed, Naruto let the Buddha construct dissolve, returning to his normal size but keeping Ino's hand firmly in his own. Around them, the village was already beginning to rebuild, not just the physical structures, but the bonds between people that made it more than just a collection of buildings. "Well," Pain said with something that might have been a smile, "I suppose I owe you all an apology, and probably some help with the cleanup." "We'd appreciate both." Tsunade's voice came from behind them as the Hokage approached, looking tired but oddly proud. "But first, I think we need to have a very long conversation about what just happened here." The short version, Naruto glanced around at the faces surrounding them, friends, allies, former enemies, all of them connected by something deeper than politics or village loyalty. "We figured out that the strongest technique in the world isn't something you do to other people. It's something you do with them." And the long version, Naruto squeezed Ino's hand, feeling the warmth of their connection pulse through the golden energy that still flickered faintly around their joined fingers. "The long version is going to take a while to explain," he said with a grin that was pure mischief and determination. "Good thing we've got all the time in the world." As they walked back toward the village center, surrounded by people who were alive because they'd chosen to trust each other, Naruto felt something settle in his chest that he'd been carrying without realizing it. The weight was still there, the responsibility, the knowledge of what could go wrong, the understanding that this was just the beginning of a much larger challenge. But now he wasn't carrying it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was going to make all the difference. The cleanup took 3 days, not the physical rebuilding, that would take months, maybe years depending on how much help they could get from allied villages. But the emotional cleanup, the processing of what had happened and what it meant for everyone involved, that took exactly 3 days before Naruto couldn't take any more well-meaning visitors and locked himself in his apartment with strict orders not to be disturbed. It wasn't that he was ungrateful for the recognition, or the gratitude, or even the growing whispers about his obvious destiny as the next Hokage. It was just overwhelming. Every person he passed on the street wanted to thank him personally. Every ninja in the village wanted to discuss tactical applications of the network they'd shared. Every civilian wanted to know if he could do it again, if he could protect them from whatever came next. And underneath all of it was a question nobody was asking, but everyone was thinking, what happens when he's not here? You can't hide in there forever, Ino's voice called through his door, accompanied by the soft sound of a key turning in the lock. Of course she had a key. She'd been practically living here since the battle anyway, helping coordinate the mental rehabilitation of villagers who'd experienced the resurrection process. I'm not hiding, Naruto called back, not moving from his position sprawled on the couch. I'm strategically regrouping. With a dozen empty ramen cups and what appears to be a 3-day beard, Ino stepped into view, carrying a tray that smelled like actual food instead of instant noodles. Very strategic. It's called maintaining caloric intake while processing traumatic experiences. It's called wallowing. She set the tray on his coffee table and settled beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth but not quite touching. Want to talk about it? About what? The part where I accidentally became the most powerful ninja in the village. The part where people are already talking about making me Hokage before I'm even legally an adult. Or the part where I'm pretty sure I just painted the biggest target on Konoha's back in recorded history. Ino was quiet for a moment, studying his profile. About the part where you're terrified that you're not good enough to live up to what people expect from you. Naruto's laugh was bitter. That obvious, huh? Only to someone who knows you. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. And only because I've been feeling the same thing. You, Naruto turned to look at her properly for the first time in days. Ino, you coordinated the mental states of 3,000 people simultaneously while maintaining tactical oversight of a village-wide battle. What could you possibly be worried about? Oh, I don't know. Maybe the fact that half the Jounin Council is talking about creating a new position just for me, Deputy Communications Commander, with authority over all village-wide mental networking. Her voice carried a tremor he'd never heard before. They want to make it official, Naruto. They want to make me responsible for keeping everyone connected all the time. The weight of that responsibility hit him like a physical blow. That's huge. It's terrifying is what it is. Ino leaned back against the couch cushions, suddenly looking as exhausted as he felt. I've been in so many people's heads over the past few days, sometimes I forget which thoughts are mine. And they want me to do it permanently, professionally, as my primary ninja duty. Do you want to? I don't know. Part of me does, the part that remembers how it felt when everyone was connected, when we all understood each other perfectly, when nobody had to face their problems alone. Her grip on his hand tightened. But part of me is scared that if I spend all my time in other people's minds, I'll lose track of who I am. Naruto understood that fear intimately. The borrowed memories from Sengoku were becoming more integrated every day, to the point where sometimes he couldn't tell if a strategic insight was his own or an echo from someone else's lifetime. We could figure it out together, he said quietly. Set boundaries, take turns, make sure neither of us gets lost in the responsibility. Is that what partners do? I think that's what partners do. He turned to face her fully, and something in his expression made her breath catch. But I'm kind of making this up as I go along. Before she could respond, the world tilted sideways and Naruto was somewhere else entirely. A massive office overlooking a harbor full of ships flying flags at half-mast. Behind the desk, a man in a white coat stared at a document that would change everything. His promotion to Fleet Admiral, effective immediately. The weight of absolute authority over hundreds of thousands of Marines, responsibility for justice across the entire world, the knowledge that every decision he made would ripple outward to affect millions of lives. Congratulations, Sengoku, came a voice from behind him. Garp, of course, the only person who would dare enter without knocking. How's it feel to have the weight of the world on your shoulders? Heavy. The word came out like a confession. Heavier than I expected. That's how you know you're the right person for the job. Garp settled into a chair uninvited, studying his old friend's face. Anyone who wanted this much power probably shouldn't have it, and anyone who doesn't want it is smart enough to know what it costs. Sengoku set the promotion documents aside and looked out at the harbor. How many people are going to die because of my decisions, Garp? How many friends am I going to have to send into battles I know some of them won't come back from? All of them, eventually. Garp's voice was gentle but uncompromising. That's the job, that's what command means, making impossible choices so other people don't have to. And if I make the wrong choice, then you learn from it and make better choices next time. That's all any of us can do. Sengoku was quiet for a long moment, watching ships patrol the harbor with mechanical precision. It's going to be lonely, isn't it? Having to be the person everyone else depends on, but not being able to depend on anyone else in return. Only if you let it be. Garp's smile was warm despite the serious conversation. Command doesn't mean carrying everything alone, Sengoku. It means knowing when to delegate, when to trust, when to let other people share the weight. And if they can't handle it, then you find people who can. And you hold on to them like your life depends on it, because it does. Naruto gasped as the vision released him, the borrowed memory fading but leaving behind crystal-clear understanding. Beside him, Ino was watching with concern, her mental presence a steady anchor in the storm of someone else's experiences. "Another memory?" she asked softly. "Fleet Admiral," Naruto said, his voice hoarse. The day Sengoku was promoted to Fleet Admiral, the highest position in the Marine hierarchy, complete authority over the world's largest military force. How did he handle it? He was terrified. The admission came out like a revelation. He was absolutely terrified that he wasn't good enough, that he'd make the wrong choices, that people would die because of his decisions. But he did it anyway. He did it anyway. Because someone had to, and he was the best option available. Naruto turned to look at Ino, and there was something in his eyes that made her chest feel tight. But he didn't do it alone. He had people he trusted, people who could share the weight, people who wouldn't let him disappear into the responsibility. The implication hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Naruto," Ino said carefully, "are you asking me too?" "I'm asking you to be my partner in everything," he interrupted, his voice carrying conviction that surprised them both. Not just missions, not just the mental networking, but all of it. The decisions, the responsibility, the weight of whatever we're becoming. That's a big ask. It's the biggest ask I've ever made. His hand tightened around hers. "But I can't do this alone, Ino. I don't want to do it alone. And I think you don't want to do it alone either." She was quiet for a long moment, processing what he was offering, not just partnership, but true equality in whatever came next. The chance to shape the future instead of just responding to it. "What if we're not ready?" she asked finally. "What if we mess up something important? What if people get hurt because we're learning on the job? Then we'll learn from it and do better next time." Naruto's smile was soft but determined. That's all anyone can do, right? Try their best with the information they have and adjust when they learn more. And if the village isn't ready for leaders as young as us, then we prove we're worth trusting. Not through grand gestures or displays of power, but through consistent choices that put other people's well-being ahead of our own comfort. Ino studied his face, seeing not just the boy she'd grown up with but glimpses of the man he was becoming, someone who carried authority like a tool instead of a weapon, who understood that real strength came from connection rather than domination. "Okay," she said simply. Okay, let's do it. Let's be partners in everything." Her smile was radiant. "Let's figure out how to lead together, how to use these abilities responsibly, how to build something better than what we inherited." The relief that flooded through Naruto was almost overwhelming. For the first time since the battle with pain, he felt like he could breathe properly. "Thank you," he whispered, and the gratitude in his voice made her eyes water slightly. "Thank you for asking." She shifted closer until they were sharing the same cushion on his battered couch. "So what happens now? Do we march into the Hokage's office and demand co-leadership positions? Stage a tactical demonstration that proves we're indispensable? Now we finish cleaning up from the last crisis before we start planning for the next one." Naruto's grin was pure mischief. "But first I do something I've been wanting to do for weeks but haven't had the courage for." Before she could ask what he meant, he was leaning forward, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek with infinite gentleness. The kiss was soft and hesitant at first, a question more than a statement, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she melted into him, her own hand coming up to tangle in his hair as she kissed him back with enthusiasm that made his heart race. The golden energy that always simmered just beneath his skin flared briefly, echoing whatever power Ino carried, creating a moment of perfect harmony between their abilities. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard and grinning like idiots. That was, Ino started, then trailed off, apparently unable to find adequate words. Yeah, Naruto agreed, understanding perfectly. It really was. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands linked and shoulders touching, processing the magnitude of what they'd just committed to. Outside, the sounds of reconstruction continued, hammers and saws and voices calling out instructions as the village slowly rebuilt itself into something that might be stronger than what had come before. Naruto, Ino said eventually. When we're old and gray and looking back on all this, what do you think we'll remember most? He considered the question seriously, thinking about Sengoku's memories and the weight of command and the thousands of small decisions that shaped the course of history. Not the big dramatic moments, he said finally. Not the battles or the political maneuvering or even the times we saved the world. I think we'll remember the quiet moments like this one when we chose to trust each other with something important. Even if it all goes horribly wrong. Especially if it all goes horribly wrong. His smile was warm and sure and absolutely unshakable. Because at least we'll know we tried to do it right, together. A knock at the door interrupted the moment, followed by Kakashi's voice calling through the wood. Sorry to interrupt whatever's happening in there, but Tsunade wants to see you both. Something about formalizing your new positions before the other villages start asking awkward questions about Konoha's command structure. Naruto and Ino looked at each other, then burst into laughter that was equal parts nervousness and anticipation. I guess this is it, Ino said, standing up and offering him her hand. Ready to make it official. With you, I'm ready for anything. As they walked toward the door, toward whatever ceremony or responsibility or impossible challenge awaited them, Naruto felt the weight of Sengoku's memories settle into something that felt less like a burden and more like a foundation. He wasn't carrying that legacy alone anymore. He had someone who understood, someone who would help him bear the weight of difficult decisions and impossible choices. More importantly, he had someone who would make sure he never forgot that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about having the courage to keep looking for better questions. And with Ino's hand in his and the golden energy of their combined abilities humming quietly beneath their skin, Naruto Uzumaki walked out to meet whatever the future held for them. Together, the War Council room in the Land of Iron was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, cold stone walls, a massive table that could seat representatives from all 5 major villages with room to spare. What it wasn't designed for was a 17-year-old in an orange jacket, casually redrawing the entire strategic map, while the most powerful people in the ninja world watched in fascination. You want to do what? Gaara's voice carried the careful neutrality that had become his trademark as Kazekage, but Naruto could sense the genuine interest underneath. Split our forces into hunting packs instead of traditional armies, Naruto replied, not looking up from the map he was modifying. Red lines connected scattered points across the continent, creating a web of interlocking patrol routes and response zones. Akatsuki works in pairs, right? Small, mobile, incredibly dangerous. So we counter with small, mobile, incredibly coordinated units. That's, the Reikage paused, his usual bluster replaced by thoughtful consideration. Actually not completely insane, but coordination on that scale, across that much territory with that many independent units, would be impossible under normal circumstances, Tsunade finished, settling back in her chair with something that might have been pride. But these aren't normal circumstances. All eyes turned to Ino, who sat beside Naruto with perfect posture and an expression of focused calm. In the weeks since their partnership had been formalized, she'd grown into her role as strategic communications coordinator with surprising grace. The shy girl who used to compete with Sakura over boys was nowhere to be seen. In her place was a young woman who could coordinate the thoughts of hundreds of people across vast distances without breaking a sweat. Network range is approximately 200 miles under optimal conditions, she reported with professional precision. I can maintain stable connections with up to 50 individual units simultaneously, allowing for real-time tactical coordination and immediate response to changing conditions. 50 units, the Tsuchikage mused, stroking his beard. Even small teams, that's still close to 400 ninja under direct coordination. Add in traditional command structures for the larger formations. We're looking at the most coordinated military operation in recorded history, Naruto said simply. No more miscommunication, no more friendly fire incidents, no more units stumbling into each other's operations. Everyone knows where everyone else is, what they're doing, and how it fits into the bigger picture. The silence that followed was heavy with possibility and concern in equal measure. The logistics alone, Mifune, the samurai leader, shook his head slowly. Supply lines, medical support, extraction protocols for 50 independent units, already worked out. Naruto produced a scroll that unrolled to reveal supply depot locations, medical staging areas, and extraction routes mapped with obsessive detail. Ino's network isn't just tactical, it's logistical. We know exactly what each unit needs when they need it and where they'll be when they need it. And if something happens to her, the Mizuki's question was blunt but necessary. All of this coordination depends on a single person maintaining mental contact across hundreds of miles. What if she's injured, or captured, or killed? The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees as golden energy began flickering around Naruto's hands. Not threatening exactly, but definitely noticeable. That won't happen, he said with quiet certainty, because she won't be alone out there. We're partners. Where she goes, I go. What threatens her threatens me. And what threatens me? He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone in the room had read the reports from Konoha's defense, had heard about the golden construct that could restrain legendary Sannin and coordinate village-wide operations simultaneously. Besides, Ino added with a slight smile, the network isn't quite as fragile as you think. I've been training backup coordinators, other Yamanaka clan members who can maintain smaller networks if something happens to me. Not at my scale, but enough to keep units connected until primary coordination is restored. Redundancy, Gaara observed approvingly. Good, what about enemy countermeasures? If Akatsuki realizes how our coordination works, they'll try to disrupt it, Naruto agreed, which is why we've built in countermeasures of our own. What followed was an hour-long presentation that redefined how the assembled leaders thought about warfare. Traditional military thinking focused on overwhelming force applied at decisive points. Mass your strength, crush the enemy's weakest position, exploit the breakthrough to roll up their entire line. Naruto and Ino's approach was fundamentally different. Instead of trying to overpower their opponents, they would outthink them. 50 coordinated units could appear to be everywhere at once, could respond to threats before they fully developed, could turn the enemy's own mobility against them by always being one step ahead. It's like fighting shadows, the Reikage muttered, studying the tactical diagrams. How do you counter an enemy that knows where you're going before you get there? You don't, Naruto said with satisfaction. That's the point. We make ourselves impossible to predict while making them completely transparent to us. And the larger strategic picture, Tsunade asked. This handles tactical coordination beautifully, but what about the overall war effort? Naruto's expression grew more serious as he gestured to a different map. This one showing major population centers, strategic resources, and likely targets for Akatsuki operations. They're not trying to conquer territory, he said. They're trying to capture the tailed beasts, which means they need the Jinchuriki alive. That gives us leverage. We know their primary objectives, we know they have operational limitations, and we know they can't afford to simply destroy everything in their path. So we use that against them, Ino continued seamlessly. Force them to come to us on ground of our choosing under conditions that favor our coordination advantages. A trap, Gaara said slowly. You want to use us as bait. I want to use the fact that they need us alive to create opportunities where we can engage them on favorable terms, Naruto corrected. It's not about sacrifice or acceptable losses, it's about turning their operational requirements into our tactical advantages. The debate that followed was intense but productive. Each cage raised concerns, proposed modifications, suggested improvements to the overall strategy. But underneath the professional discussion, Naruto could sense something else: hope. For the first time since Akatsuki had emerged as a major threat, they had a plan that felt like it might actually work. One last question, the Mizukage said as the formal session was winding down. This level of coordination, this kind of tactical innovation, where did it come from? Neither of you had formal strategic training before this. Naruto and Ino exchanged a look, and in that glance was the weight of everything they'd discovered about themselves over the past months. Experience, Naruto said finally. Not ours exactly, but inherited experience. Memories of someone who spent decades fighting wars like this, making decisions like this, carrying responsibility like this. And you trust these memories. These inherited instincts. We trust them because they've been right so far, Ino replied. But more than that, we trust each other to keep the memories from overwhelming who we are. The tactical knowledge is useful, but it's not what makes us effective. What does make you effective? Connection. Naruto's answer was immediate and certain. The ability to see not just the strategic picture, but the people within it. To remember that every unit on this map represents individuals with families, dreams, fears, hopes for the future. Sengoku, the person whose memories I carry, he was brilliant tactically, but his real strength was understanding that strategy without compassion is just organized cruelty, Naruto continued. Every plan we make, every decision we propose starts with the question, how do we protect as many people as possible while accomplishing our objectives? And if those goals conflict, then we find a third option, Ino said with quiet conviction. That's what partners do. They help each other see possibilities that neither could find alone. As the meeting finally adjourned, and the various leaders began making preparations for what everyone hoped would be the final war against Akatsuki, Naruto found himself standing on a balcony overlooking the neutral territory that had hosted their planning session. Snow-covered mountains stretched to the horizon, peaceful and unchanging despite the storm of preparation happening in the valleys below. Second thoughts? Ino asked, joining him at the railing. Third and fourth thoughts, Naruto admitted. This is big, Ino. Bigger than anything we've tried before. If we're wrong, if our coordination fails, if the enemy adapts faster than we can adjust, then thousands of people die who might have lived if we'd chosen differently. Her voice was steady despite the weight of what she was saying. But if we're right, if this works, we could end this war with fewer casualties than anyone thought possible. And if we're not ready, if the pressure breaks our connection, if I can't maintain the Buddha construct during prolonged combat, if your network gets overloaded, then we adapt and overcome because that's what partners do. She reached out and took his hand, and the familiar warmth of their connection pulsed between them. Naruto, do you remember what you told Pain during the attack on Konoha? Which part? The part about shared strength being doubled, about pain shared being halved. She turned to face him fully. That wasn't just philosophy. It's literally how our abilities work now. When I'm coordinating the network, I can feel your strength supporting me. When you're manifesting the construct, you can draw on the collective will of everyone I'm connected to. And that means we're not facing this alone. Every person in our network, every ninja who trusts us to coordinate their efforts, every civilian counting on us to protect them, they're all part of this. Their strength, their hope, their determination to build something better than what we inherited. Naruto considered this, feeling the truth of it resonate through his borrowed memories. Sengoku had been alone at the end, isolated by command and responsibility and the weight of impossible choices. But Naruto didn't have to be. He had Ino, he had their network, he had an entire alliance of people who'd chosen to stand together instead of falling separately. All right, he said, and his voice carried new determination. Let's do this. Let's end this war before it really begins. The golden energy that flickered around their joined hands pulsed brighter, echoing with whatever power Ino carried, creating a brief nimbus of light that probably could have been seen from miles away. Below them, in the halls and courtyards of the Iron Country's neutral territory, hundreds of ninja from 5 major villages prepared for what might be their final campaign. Some would come home, some wouldn't. But for the first time since this conflict began, they all knew exactly what they were fighting for and who was fighting beside them. So, Ino said as they watched the organized chaos of war preparation unfold below them. Ready to change the world. With you, Naruto's grin was pure confidence and mischief. I'm ready for anything. The war was coming. But they would meet it together with plans that accounted for both the strategic necessities and human cost, with abilities that had been honed through partnership and tested in the crucible of defending what they cared about. And for the first time in his life, Naruto Uzumaki felt truly ready to carry the weight of other people's hopes. The battlefield stretched across what had once been a peaceful valley, now scarred by craters and littered with the debris of a war that had already lasted too long. From his position on a ridge overlooking the chaos, Naruto could see the full scope of the conflict through Ino's mental network. 50 coordinated units moving like a single organism, responding to threats before they fully developed, turning the enemy's own tactics against them with ruthless efficiency. It should have been working perfectly, and for the most part it was. Status report, he called through the network, his consciousness touching dozens of minds simultaneously while his eyes tracked the movement of enemy forces across the valley floor. Western Front stable, came Shikamaru's mental voice, crisp with tactical precision. Enemy advance halted, minimal casualties on our side. Southern units have successfully eliminated 2 Akatsuki pairs, Gaara reported. Pursuing stragglers toward designated containment zone. Eastern perimeter, Kakashi's mental voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a surge of alarm that made every connected mind wince in sympathy. "What's happening on the Eastern Front?" Naruto demanded, his enhanced senses reaching out toward the disturbance. "New hostiles," Kakashi's voice returned, tight with strain. "Major chakra signatures unlike anything we've encountered before. They're moving like they know exactly where our people are positioned." Through the network, Naruto felt the first hints of what would become a disaster. The enemy wasn't just adapting to their tactics, they were countering them with something that felt uncomfortably familiar. "Ino," he said quietly, not needing to raise his voice for her to hear him from her position maintaining the communication hub 50 yards away. "Are you sensing what I'm sensing?" Someone else is coordinating them, her mental voice carried grim certainty. "There's another network, another mind touching multiple consciousness simultaneously, someone with abilities like mine." The implications hit Naruto like a physical blow. Everything they'd built, every advantage they'd carefully cultivated, every strategic innovation that had made their coordinated approach so effective. It was all useless if the enemy could match their coordination while maintaining superior numbers and raw power. "Can you counter-network, disrupt their communications?" "I can try," but Ino's mental voice cut off in a spike of pain that made every connected mind gasp in sympathy. "Naruto, whoever this is, they're strong, really strong. And they're not just coordinating, they're actively attacking the network itself." Through their connection, Naruto felt the strain as Ino threw every bit of her abilities into maintaining their communications while simultaneously trying to disrupt the enemy's coordination. It was like watching someone try to fight a war on two fronts with insufficient resources for either. "All units, this is tactical command," Naruto broadcast through the network, his mental voice carrying absolute authority. "Enemy has developed coordination capabilities. Adjust to independent operations, maintain unit cohesion, but don't rely on network coordination for the next phase." The response was immediate, 50 units smoothly transitioning from coordinated pack tactics to traditional military operations. But even as they adapted, Naruto could see the enemy forces pressing their advantage, moving with the kind of precision that spoke of supernatural coordination. That's when he saw them. Two figures stood at the center of the enemy formation, both wearing the black cloaks with red clouds that had become synonymous with nightmare across the ninja world. But it wasn't their clothing that made Naruto's blood run cold, it was their faces. The masked man from the attack on Konoha, the one who'd called himself Obito Uchiha. And beside him, a figure that made Sengoku's borrowed memories scream with recognition and terror. An older man with long white hair and eyes that carried the weight of decades, wearing armor that had seen more battles than most ninja would fight in a lifetime. "Madara Uchiha," Naruto breathed, the name carrying the weight of legend and nightmare in equal measure. "Naruto," Ino's mental voice was strained with effort, "I'm losing the network. Whoever's coordinating them, they're not just disrupting our communications, they're turning our own connections against us. I can feel them trying to get inside our people's heads. Can you hold them off? For a while, but not forever. And not if they escalate." Through his enhanced senses, Naruto could feel the battle turning against them. Not catastrophically, their people were too well trained and too determined to break easily. But incrementally, inexorably, as superior coordination began to tell against even superior individual skill. That's when the first scream cut through the mental network like a knife. One of their Eastern units, a 4-person team including 2 Chunin he'd known since the academy, simply vanished from the network. Not dead, which would have been horrible enough, but worse, corrupted. Their mental signatures twisted into something cold and alien before cutting off entirely. "They're not just disrupting the network," Ino's voice carried dawning horror. "They're taking control of our people. Using the connections I created to turn them into puppets. Cut the network," Naruto ordered immediately. "Right now, full disconnection. If I do that, we lose all coordination. Our people will be fighting blind. Better blind than compromised. Do it." The sudden silence in his mind as Ino severed every connection was like going deaf and blind simultaneously. For months, he'd grown accustomed to the gentle presence of dozens of minds, the awareness of where everyone was and what they were doing. Without it, the battlefield felt alien and hostile. But it also felt clean. No foreign influence, no twisted echoes of corrupted allies, just his own thoughts and Ino's presence through their personal bond. "All right," he said, golden energy beginning to flare around him as he prepared for what came next. "If they want to play mind games, let's give them something to really think about." The Buddha construct that rose from his position on the ridge was different from anything he'd manifested before. Where previous versions had been translucent, protective, focused on defense and rescue, this one blazed with solid golden light that hurt to look at directly. It was massive, easily 50 feet tall, and radiated power that made the air itself thrum with potential. But more than its size or energy, what made this construct truly terrifying was its purpose. This wasn't just a protective avatar or a rescue tool. This was a weapon of war, designed specifically to face down enemies who commanded armies and bent reality to their will. Naruto, Ino's mental voice reached him through their personal connection. "I can feel what you're doing, and it's incredible, but you can't maintain something that powerful for long. The energy requirements alone, I know." His voice carried grim determination as the construct began moving down the ridge toward the center of the battlefield. "That's why this has to end quickly." The enemy forces scattered as the Golden Giant approached, but their coordination remained flawless. Where traditional armies would have broken and run from such an overwhelming display of power, these fighters moved with supernatural precision to positions that would allow them to strike at the construct's weak points. "Impressive," Madara's voice carried clearly across the battlefield as he rode his own manifestation. A massive skeletal warrior wreathed in blue chakra that matched the Buddha construct in size if not in radiance. But ultimately pointless. You cannot defeat an army with a single technique, no matter how spectacular. "Watch me," Naruto replied, and the construct's multiple arms began moving in patterns that spoke of violence held barely in check. What followed was a battle that redefined what was possible in ninja combat. The Golden Buddha and the perfect Susanoo clashed with earth-shaking force, their impacts sending shockwaves across the valley that could be felt for miles. But even as they fought, both combatants were coordinating larger strategies. Madara directing his forces with gestures and mental commands, Naruto using his enhanced senses to track threats and protect his scattered allies. The problem was that Madara had been doing this for decades, while Naruto was learning on the job. "Western units are falling back," Ino reported through their connection, her mental voice tight with strain. "Eastern front has collapsed entirely. Southern perimeter is holding, but barely." "What about Sasuke's team?" Naruto asked, even as he drove one of the construct's fists toward Madara's Susanoo with enough force to level a mountain. "Still operational, but cut off from support. They're surrounded about 2 miles north of your position." Naruto's enhanced awareness could feel his former teammate's chakra signature, familiar despite everything that had happened between them, but also different. Colder, more focused, carrying the weight of choices that had cost him more than power could ever repay. "Tell him I'm coming," Naruto ordered, then did something that should have been impossible. The Buddha construct split. Not into pieces, but into multiple smaller versions. A dozen 20-foot avatars that blazed with the same golden light, but moved independently. It was like seeing one person become an army, each construct operating with perfect coordination while maintaining enough individual power to threaten major opponents. "How are you doing that?" Ino's mental voice carried awe and concern in equal measure. "I'm not," Naruto admitted as the smaller constructs began engaging enemy forces across the battlefield. "We are. I can feel your strength supporting me even without the full network. And somehow I can feel them too, our people, the ones still fighting. Their determination, their trust, their refusal to give up." Through their connection, Ino could sense what he meant. Despite the severed network, despite the tactical disadvantage, despite being outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the Allied forces were still fighting. Not because they had to, but because they believed in what they were protecting. And somehow that belief was feeding directly into Naruto's abilities. It's like the village defense, Ino realized. When everyone was connected, when they were all contributing to the resurrection technique. You're drawing strength from their conviction, even without active mental links. "More than that," Naruto said, his primary construct landing beside Sasuke's position and immediately engaging the enemy forces that had them surrounded. "I'm giving it back to them. Every person who refuses to quit, every team that holds their position against impossible odds, they're getting stronger too." The tide of battle began to shift as this became apparent. Individual ninja found themselves moving faster, hitting harder, coordinating better with their immediate teammates. Not through supernatural networking, but through the kind of shared purpose that had built the great ninja villages in the first place. But even as the Allied forces rallied, Naruto could feel the strain of maintaining so many constructs simultaneously. The technique was powerful beyond anything he'd previously achieved, but it was burning through his chakra reserves at an unsustainable rate. Naruto, Ino's mental voice carried desperate urgency, massive chakra signature approaching from the east. Something bigger than anything we've faced before. He felt it too, a presence that dwarfed even Madara's perfect Susanoo, moving toward the battlefield with implacable purpose. Through his enhanced senses, he could make out details that made his borrowed memories shudder with recognition. The 10 Tails. The origin of all chakra, the source of the Sage of Six Paths power, the ultimate expression of natural energy given malevolent form. "How long until it reaches us?" he asked, though he already knew the answer wouldn't be good enough. 10 minutes, maybe less. 10 minutes to end a battle that had been building for months. 10 minutes to defeat enemies who had been planning this war for years. 10 minutes to save not just the Allied forces, but possibly the entire world. And that's when everything went wrong. Naruto. Ino's mental voice cut through his tactical considerations like a scream. The network, someone's attacking it directly. Not disrupting, attacking. They're trying to, her mental voice cut off in a spike of agony that made Naruto stagger. Through their connection, he could feel what was happening. The enemy coordinator wasn't just disrupting their communications anymore. They were actively attacking Ino's mind, trying to shatter her psyche through the very abilities that made her so valuable. "I can't," her voice returned briefly, weaker than before. "It hurts, Naruto. They're in my head trying to tear apart everything that makes me. The golden constructs flickered as Naruto's concentration wavered. Around the battlefield, Allied forces found themselves suddenly vulnerable as the strength they'd been drawing from his abilities began to fade. And that's when Naruto Uzumaki discovered what it meant to have something worth fighting for. The rage that filled him was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Not the hot, impulsive anger of his youth, but something cold and implacable and utterly terrifying. Through his enhanced senses, he could feel Ino's pain, could sense the foreign presence trying to destroy the person he loved more than his own life. The golden light around him changed, becoming brighter and more focused. Not just energy anymore, but intent given form. The scattered constructs suddenly snapped back together into a single avatar that towered above even the perfect Susanoo, its multiple arms moving with precision that spoke of supernatural coordination. But more than size or power, what made this final transformation truly terrifying was its emotional resonance. Every person on the battlefield, ally and enemy alike, could feel the love that drove it, the absolute refusal to let harm come to someone precious, the kind of protective instinct that could move mountains or stop time itself. "Get away from her!" Each word carried the weight of absolute command, and the construct's movements matched the cold fury in Naruto's voice. What followed was less a battle than a force of nature expressing itself through violence. The construct moved with impossible speed, its attacks coordinated not just tactically, but emotionally. Every strike driven by love turned into protective fury, every defensive action motivated by the absolute refusal to lose someone irreplaceable. Madara's Susanoo, which had seemed invincible moments before, was driven back step by step. The enemy coordination network collapsed as its controller found themselves facing something that transcended normal combat, not just a powerful opponent, but someone fighting for something more important than victory. Naruto, Ino's mental voice returned, weak but stable. "I'm okay. Hurt, but okay. You broke their attack, freed me from whatever they were doing." The relief that flooded through him was almost overwhelming, but he forced himself to stay focused. The 10 Tails was still approaching, Madara was still dangerous despite being driven back, and their forces were still outnumbered and outgunned. But something had changed. Through his enhanced senses, he could feel it, not just in himself, but in everyone around him. The display of protective fury, the visible proof that someone was willing to fight that hard for another person, had inspired something in the Allied forces that went beyond mere tactics or strategy. They weren't just fighting to win anymore, they were fighting to protect what they cared about, and that made all the difference. "Sasuke's team is moving to support you," Ino reported, her mental voice growing stronger. He says it's about time he helped you save the world instead of trying to destroy it." Through the golden construct's enhanced vision, Naruto could see his former teammate approaching. Not the cold, distant figure who'd left Konoha years ago, but someone who'd found his own reasons to fight for something bigger than personal revenge. Together, Sasuke called out as his own Susanoo materialized beside the Buddha construct. Together, Naruto agreed, and for the first time since the battle began, he felt like they might actually win this. The 10 tails crested the ridge as they spoke, its massive form blotting out the sky. But instead of despair, Naruto felt only determination. He had his partner, he had his best friend, he had an army of people who believed in building something better than what they'd inherited. And most importantly, he had something worth fighting for that transcended personal ambition or individual power, the absolute conviction that love, properly applied, could overcome any obstacle. The final gambit was about to begin. The 10 tails stood like a mountain given malevolent life, its 10 massive tails carving trenches through the earth with every casual movement. From where Naruto floated within his golden Buddha construct, he could feel the creature's presence like a weight pressing down on reality itself, not just physical mass, but the accumulated malice of centuries given form. This is it, he thought to Ino through their connection. Everything we've trained for, everything we've built together, it all comes down to this. I know, her mental voice came back steady despite everything she'd just endured. And I'm ready, we're ready. Around them, the battlefield had gone eerily quiet as every combatant, allied forces, and remaining Akatsuki alike, stared up at the creature that dwarfed even their most powerful techniques. The 10 tails wasn't just another enemy to be defeated. It was a force of nature that challenged the very possibility of victory. Any brilliant strategic insights? Sasuke asked from within his purple Susanoo, his voice carrying the dry humor that had once driven Naruto to distraction and now felt like the most welcome sound in the world. Actually, yeah, Naruto's reply surprised them both. Sengoku's memories are showing me something. This thing, it's not just a weapon or a beast. It's a corruption of natural energy, the antithesis of everything that connects living things to each other. And that helps us how? Because connection is what we do best. The Buddha construct began to glow brighter, but not with aggressive energy, with something warmer, more inviting. Ino, I need you to do something that's probably impossible. Name it. I need you to connect with everyone, not just our people, not just the allied forces, everyone still alive on this battlefield, including the enemy. The silence that followed was profound enough that Naruto wondered if their mental link had been severed again. Naruto, Ino said finally, you do realize that includes people who have been trying to kill us for the past several hours. I know, but look at them. Through his enhanced senses, he could perceive the emotional states of everyone present. Fear, desperation, the dawning realization that this battle had escalated beyond anyone's ability to control. They're not fighting for conquest anymore. They're fighting for survival, same as us. Across the battlefield, he could see Madara standing atop a rocky outcropping, his usual arrogant confidence replaced by something that might have been concern as he stared up at the creature he'd helped unleash. Even Obito's masked figure seemed smaller, less certain, dwarfed by the magnitude of what they'd brought into the world. The 10 tails doesn't care about their plans or our alliance, Naruto continued. It's a force of pure destruction. If it reaches full power, everyone dies. Their people are people, everyone. So you want to convince our enemies to work with us against a mutual threat. I want to remind everyone, friends and enemies alike, that there are things more important than whatever we were fighting about 5 minutes ago. Sasuke's Susanoo turned to face the Buddha construct, and through its translucent features Naruto could see his friend's expression shifting from skepticism to understanding. You're not talking about a temporary ceasefire, Sasuke realized. You're talking about fundamental change, about proving that cooperation is stronger than conflict. I'm talking about showing everyone what's possible when we choose connection over conquest. The golden light around the Buddha construct pulsed, and suddenly every person on the battlefield could feel it, not as an attack or a technique, but as an invitation. Ino, this is either the most brilliant idea you've ever had or the most insane. Her mental presence expanded like an opening flower, reaching out not just to their allies, but to every conscious mind within range. But I trust you, I trust us. What followed was unlike anything in recorded history. As Ino's abilities reached across the battlefield, touching friend and foe alike, people began to feel something they'd almost forgotten in the chaos of war: genuine connection. Not the artificial coordination of military necessity, but the deep recognition that everyone present was human, was afraid, was hoping to survive to see another day. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Hardened combat veterans found themselves looking at their opponents and seeing not monsters to be destroyed, but people who were just as scared and desperate as they were. Enemy ninja who'd been willing to die for their cause suddenly understood that their opponents had families too, dreams too, reasons for fighting that went beyond mere ideology. It's working, Ino reported, wonder evident in her mental voice. They're not attacking each other anymore. They're all looking at the 10 tails and realizing that none of our differences matter if we're all dead, Naruto finished. But this is just the beginning. Now comes the hard part. The 10 tails chose that moment to demonstrate why it was considered the ultimate threat. One of its massive tails swept across the battlefield with casual violence, and where it passed, the earth itself seemed to die, not just destroyed, but drained of the life force that allowed anything to grow or flourish. The attack should have scattered both armies, sent everyone running for whatever cover they could find. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Without orders, without coordination, without any formal agreement, ninja from both sides began working together to deflect the attack. Earth-style users pooled their chakra to raise barriers. Wind-style techniques combined to redirect the devastating force. Water and fire users worked in tandem to create steam screens that obscured civilian evacuation routes. For just a moment, there were no sides, only people working together to survive something that threatened them all equally. Naruto, Ino's mental voice carried breathless amazement. Do you feel that? It's not just cooperation. It's actual unity. For the first time since the network was established, everyone is thinking of themselves as part of the same group. Then let's give them something worth uniting around. The Buddha construct rose higher, its golden light intensifying until it became a beacon visible for miles in every direction. Everyone who can hear this, everyone who's tired of watching people die for causes none of us really understand, it's time to end this. Not just the battle, not just the war, but the whole cycle of violence that got us here in the first place. Through the mental network, every person present could feel Naruto's absolute conviction, his unshakable belief that there was another way forward. But more than that, they could feel Ino's strength supporting him, could sense the depth of trust and partnership that made such impossible idealism seem achievable. This is what Sengoku was trying to build, isn't it? Ino asked through their private connection. Not just peace through superior firepower, but genuine understanding between former enemies. He tried, Naruto replied, drawing on borrowed memories of an old man who'd spent decades fighting wars he never wanted to win. But he was alone, he didn't have what we have, which is each other, and the proof that love can literally move mountains. The 10 tails, perhaps sensing that its presence was uniting rather than scattering its opponents, let out a roar that shattered stone and made the air itself vibrate with malevolent energy. When it charged, the ground shook under footfalls that registered as earthquakes. That's when Naruto did something that redefined what was possible in ninja combat. Instead of meeting the charge with the Buddha construct's own power, he opened himself completely to the network Ino was maintaining. Not just drawing strength from their connection, but inviting everyone present, allied forces and former enemies alike, to contribute whatever they could to what came next. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Chakra flowed from hundreds of sources, not just to Naruto but through him, creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. The Buddha construct blazed with light that contained traces of every person contributing, gold and blue and silver and crimson, a rainbow of human determination given physical form. But more than just chakra, what flowed through the network was intent. The collective will of everyone present, focused not on destruction but on protection. The absolute refusal to let this creature of pure malice destroy everything they cared about. When the enhanced Buddha construct met the 10 tails charge, the collision could be felt across 3 countries. But unlike previous clashes that had been about raw power overpowering raw power, this was something else entirely. The golden light didn't just stop the creature, it began to change it. Where the construct's hands touched the 10 tails' massive form, the corruption that defined it began to fade. Not destroyed or suppressed, but transformed back into what it had originally been, natural energy, the force that connected all living things, freed from the malice that had perverted it for so long. How are you doing that? Sasuke's mental voice cut through the network, carrying amazement that bordered on disbelief. I'm not, Naruto replied, and his honesty was evident to everyone connected. We are, all of us together. The 10 tails is a perversion of connection, of the bonds between living things. So we're showing it what real connection looks like. Through the network, everyone present could feel it, the gradual transformation of something that had been pure malevolence into something that was simply natural, powerful beyond description, but no longer actively hostile to life itself. The process should have taken hours, maybe days. But with hundreds of people contributing their strength, their hope, their determination to build something better than what they'd inherited, the purification accelerated beyond all expectation. When the light finally faded, the creature that remained was still massive, still incredibly powerful. but its eyes held intelligence instead of malice, curiosity instead of hunger for destruction. "Well," came Madara's voice from across the battlefield, and for the first time since anyone had known him, he sounded genuinely impressed. "That was unexpected." "The best plans usually are," Naruto replied, settling the now calm Buddha construct onto the ground as exhaustion hit him like a physical weight. "The question is, what happens now?" What happened now was perhaps the most extraordinary sight in the history of the ninja world. Former enemies working together to tend the wounded, to rebuild what had been destroyed, to figure out how to carry forward the unity they'd discovered in the face of mutual annihilation. It wasn't easy. There were still grievances to address, still questions of justice and recompense, still the practical problems of how to merge military forces that had been trying to kill each other hours earlier. But for the first time in generations, there was genuine hope that these problems could be solved through negotiation rather than violence. "So," Ino said through their private connection as they watched Sasuke and Gaara coordinating refugee evacuation with former Akatsuki members, "what do we do for an encore?" "We go home," Naruto replied, and his mental voice carried a contentment she'd never heard before. "We go home, and we figure out how to build the kind of world where something like this never has to happen again. Think we can do it." With you, even exhausted, even drained from the most intensive battle of his life, Naruto's confidence was unshakable. "I think we can do anything." 3 months later, Naruto stood in the Hokage's office, not as a visitor, but as its newest occupant. The ceremony had been simple, attended by representatives from all 5 major villages and several minor ones, presided over by the woman whose shoes he was trying to fill. "Any regrets?" Tsunade asked, as she prepared to hand over the final administrative documents that would make his position official. "About becoming Hokage?" "No." Naruto glanced toward the window, where he could see Ino coordinating with a team of communication specialists who were implementing their network protocols as standard operating procedure across the allied villages. "About how we got here, a few, but regrets are just opportunities to do better next time." "Very wise." Tsunade's smile carried pride and something that might have been relief. "And your plans for the future?" "Short term. Establish permanent communication links between all the major villages, create joint training programs so people get used to working together, start addressing the economic problems that caused half these conflicts in the first place." Naruto's grin was pure mischief. "Long term, change the world. Ambitious. I have good help." Through the window, he could see Ino laughing at something one of her coordinators had said, her face bright with the kind of joy that came from doing work that mattered with people who appreciated it. "The best help." As Tsunade left him alone in the office that would be his for the foreseeable future, Naruto settled into the chair behind the Hokage's desk and looked out at the village he'd sworn to protect. It was different now, not just rebuilt, but improved. Streets were wider to accommodate better evacuation routes. Buildings were designed with community spaces that encouraged interaction between different clans and specialties. The academy had been expanded to include classes on diplomacy and conflict resolution alongside traditional combat training. But the biggest change wasn't physical, it was cultural. For the first time in anyone's memory, Konoha felt like a place where cooperation was valued more than competition, where helping others was seen as strength rather than weakness. A soft knock interrupted his contemplation, and Ino stepped into the office carrying 2 cups of tea and wearing the kind of smile that still made his heart race even after all they'd been through together. "How does it feel?" she asked, settling into the chair across from his desk with the easy familiarity of someone who belonged there. "Terrifying," Naruto admitted, "but also right. Like everything we've been through, everything we've learned, it's all been leading to this." "Any second thoughts about the partnership arrangement?" He glanced at the documents on his desk, official papers establishing the position of Deputy Hokage, a role created specifically for her and the unique abilities she brought to village leadership. "Only about whether you're sure you want to tie yourself to someone who's probably going to make at least 3 major mistakes per day for the first year. I'm counting on it." Ino's smile was radiant. "Mistakes are learning opportunities, and I can't think of anyone I'd rather learn from than you." The golden energy that flickered around their hands as he reached across the desk to take hers was gentler now, more controlled, but no less warm. If anything, it felt more natural, not a technique to be wielded, but simply part of who they were when they were together. "So," she said, intertwining their fingers, ready to save the world. Again, Naruto's grin was pure confidence and mischief and absolute determination. "With you, always." Outside the window, the village continued its evening routine, children playing in the streets, adults heading home from work, elderly couples taking walks through gardens that had been planted where battlefields once scarred the earth. It was peaceful, prosperous, and filled with the kind of hope that made people believe tomorrow could be better than today. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems to solve, still injustices to address, still the daily work of proving that cooperation could triumph over conflict. But for the first time in generations, those problems felt manageable, because they weren't facing them alone. In the years that followed, historians would mark the Fourth Great Ninja War as the end of an era, the last time major villages fought each other with the intent of total victory over total annihilation. They would write about tactical innovations and diplomatic breakthroughs, and the unprecedented coordination that allowed a coalition of former enemies to defeat a threat that might have destroyed them all separately. But the people who lived through it would remember something simpler: the moment when everyone realized that the things that connected them were stronger than the things that divided them. And in a small office overlooking a village that had become a symbol of that realization, two young leaders held hands and planned for a future where such understanding wouldn't require the threat of mutual annihilation to achieve. The golden light around their joined fingers pulsed once more, warm and steady and full of promise. And somewhere in the space between heartbeats, Naruto Uzumaki and Ino Yamanaka began the work of building a world worthy of the dreams that had carried them this far. Together as they had always been meant to be, together as they would always choose to be, the end. So there you have it, from confused teenagers with mysterious abilities to the power couple that ended ninja wars forever. Naruto and Ino proved that sometimes the strongest technique isn't about destruction, it's about connection. Which scene hit you the hardest? That Buddha construct versus perfect Susanoo clash? The moment they purified the Ten Tails through pure teamwork? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey, subscribe for more wild crossover concepts. I've got some absolutely unhinged ideas brewing. Catch you next time.